This is now episode 3 of In the Thick of It, or IT. And we have the one and only Kim Jones.
Good to be here.
Thank you for coming. I don't know how far you drove, but...
A while.
How far?
Time-wise, it took me close to an hour and a half.
Really?
Well, you're as far east as I am west of the center of town.
So you're saying I should have put this closer to Phoenix?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you coming.
No worries.
So Andy was out here. Andy lives on your side of the town as well. And he drove a lifted truck. I don't know if you've seen his truck, but it's like 10 feet off the ground, big tires. And I felt, somewhat guilty because I know that for gas, for him, it wasn't going to be a cheap
If he had a problem with that, he should drive the Kia Soul that I drive, and then he wouldn't have to worry about it.
He should. And maybe he'll see this.
Sorry, Andy.
He might chuckle. So I appreciate you coming all the way out here.
Happy to be here.
Like I told you, my whole goal with this is to be able to talk to people that would otherwise maybe not have the time, right, to speak with more people. For people that can't make it to an event to hear you speak. I know you speak at a lot of events. You do a lot of school-related things, mostly university, college-related things with Ed, I would imagine, right?
Yeah, among others, yeah.
Okay. So I like to have this for people that may not be able to hear you speak. And I actually picked you for one specific reason.
Okay.
And I'm going to tell you what that is.
Here it
comes. And I told Scott this, by the way. So before any of this happened, this is what I told Scott Jones. And I said, so we were at Cactus Con, and you were on the panel. And I was at Mark's table, right, for the CISO track.
Got it.
And I was sitting there, and you were up there with Ed, Ryan, and I forget who the other people were. It was the gentleman that does the pen testing.
I'm blanking, but I know
Andrew Wilson.
Thank you,
Andrew Wilson. So
sorry, Andrew.
Everyone was up there, right? And growing up as a teen, one of my favorite shows, and I knew this rap, by the way, was A Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And I told Scott, I said, you know what? Kim is like the IT equivalent of Uncle Phil.
Thank you, I think. Though I do understand the point.
So let me tell you why I say that, and I mean that in the most the most loving way, right? Because when I watched Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, what I saw was a lost teen, right, trying to make his way to be successful, doing all these things, making mistakes, and you had like this father figure in the background that cared so much that he was disappointed when Will couldn't do what he needed to do. And he had all the resources available to him, and he just couldn't figure out why Will couldn't be, this successful person, right? And eventually over the years, they developed this bond. And the reason I say you remind me of like an Uncle Phil is because if you've seen it, if you watched it, know he doesn't hold back.
Yeah.
And he just says what he's thinking, but he means it in a way that is constructive, but also meaningful for the people that receive it. And so when we're at Cactus Con and we were talking about, or you were kind of speaking on ways to improve the organization you work in, your political capital internally, and all these different things, to me it felt like I was listening to like an Uncle Phil of IT tell me in the most direct way what I should be doing, or what people should be doing.
I did not know where you were going with that analogy, but now that you've got there, it's like, damn, I got nothing. It fits.
Right?
It does fit.
And so that night when I went home, or the day after, I messaged you and I said, hey, I added you on LinkedIn, and the message said, you remind me of like the cool uncle. Right?
Yep, you did.
Right? And when I said the cool uncle, what I was actually thinking of was Uncle Phil. So that's why I wanted to have you talk, and why I wanted to have you in when I decided that this was something I was going to build and do, is because I know, based on what I've seen, without you being aware of me even sitting in the room, was that you're honest, you're transparent, you do whatever's possible that you can do to help others. And I think by having that sort of mentality and that clear purpose, that's what I want to be able to give to other people, because not everyone could go to the CISO track.
True.
Right? You had to pay a little bit extra to go there. It was on a Saturday, and it was made for CISOs, but I somehow snuck in. Right? I might happen to know Mike, and Mike might have been able to get me in after it was filled. I don't know. But
it's more a matter of you showed the interest and you asked. You'll find that there are lots of us that are there that if you're willing to take the extra step, you'll find that will help. You mentioned, I think it was with Andy, you were talking about regarding martial arts.
No, so Mike is martial arts.
It was Mike. I apologize. So, my dirty little secret is I used to teach self-defense martial arts for about 15 years.
Okay.
So there's a story in terms of martial arts where the students were asking, sensei, looking at the wall of weapons in the background, saying, "When will you teach me how to use the sword?" Okay. And the sensei would say, "When you're ready. When you're ready." And then finally, after years, one of the students went up and said, "Sensei, I'm ready to learn the sword." At which point the sensei took the sword down from the wall and taught him how to use it. So there's a lot of, this is a community that wants to help, but there's so many fire hoses of information that you can absorb and so many different directions you can go. Mm-hmm. Anyone who expresses an interest, you'll find that particularly amongst the old farts like myself, we'll do what we can, and usually it's very easy. So, kudos to Mike for being an absolutely wonderful representative and thought leader within this community, but kudos for you for asking.
They always, my daughter, she'll ask the most ridiculous questions. And it's usually for something that she wants. Mm-hmm. And she knows no boundaries of what she can and can't ask for. And I like, as much as it's annoying for me to hear her say certain things or ask for certain things, when it's just like, come on, really?
Yeah.
Like, she'll ask to have multiple treats in a day. Like, we kind of limit their sugar. Mm-hmm. So she'll ask, well, can I have another piece? It's like, the other one that I had was small. Can I have more? It's like, no, you know the rules. But the fact that she asked for that help, or not the help, but to be able to get that, kind of gives me some hope that as she develops and gets older, that the things that she wants, she'll ask for. And one of the things that I've kind of seen in my personal journey is that nobody openly offers, mm-hmm. right? Because there's a difference. There's a difference in the time commitment of someone that's interested in learning versus someone that just happens to be there. Mm-hmm. And what you'll notice, and what I've seen, is that even for myself personally, if I ask people for help, they're more likely to help once I ask than they are to help on their own.
Absolutely.
And so I've kind of come to the realization that you can't get what you don't ask for. And it's like, instead, like you said, when are you going to show me how to, use the sword? I'm ready. Because there's I would imagine the biggest frustration you might have is time, right? When you look at the time that you spend to help someone that's interested or someone that's not interested, if you were to spend the time with someone, say 2 hours of your day, to help someone that wasn't interested as much as the person that was ready to yield the sword, it might feel like a waste.
I can see that. I'm at a little different place in both my life and my career, Fern. So I have a slightly different outlook on that.
What is that?
I tell people in terms of introduction that I've had and been blessed with having 3 careers and a hobby associated with keeping people safe. And while I am full-time in-house working on CISO on CISO staff in a Fortune 400 company, right now I consider my primary career is as an educator. My job, my purpose is to make it better for the people coming behind me. Mm-hmm. Because eventually Mama's going to get tired of me doing this stuff and going to want me to stop. and I'm going to get tired. My bones creak a little bit. I'm going to want to stop, and I want to leave it better. So I make a commitment, and I've done this for years. Anyone who wants to ask or wants to learn, ask me. You get 30 minutes of my time. Now, that may be 2 to 3 weeks from now, unfortunately, the way my day jobs, et cetera, go. But I make it a personal mitzvah, if you will, that everybody gets 30 minutes of my time. All you have to do is ask. In some cases, people don't like what they hear. In some cases, people want me to reaffirm the bad path that they're on, or a path regarding cyber that I don't believe is appropriate, effective, etc. But that's not a waste of my time. As long as I am telling them the truth, and as long as they're expressing an interest, I'll show up. And case in point, we had, let's say 50 people roughly on the CISO track when you were in the room, probably more. Let's say 50, 70 people in the Cactus contract. Let's say I knew about 10 or 15 of them, which I did. That leaves 60 people who I said, if you want to talk, reach out to me, ping me on LinkedIn. Less than half of those 60 pinged me on LinkedIn, and you're the only one who reached out to me afterwards. So I don't think that's a waste of my time, because we're here having this conversation.
Yeah, but what it does is it goes to show the level of interest.
Yep.
Right? So I think you kind of filter out the people that are interested in talking to you or at least learning.
They filter themselves out.
Yeah. Okay, I guess that's what I meant. It's a nature of the beast.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Where you say, hey, reach out. And you know what it reminds me of is when you see someone you haven't seen in a long time and they say, hey, we should hang out.
Fair.
We should.
Yeah.
We should hang out.
Yeah.
Are you going to call me, or am I supposed to call you? And then you separate, and then you don't see them for another 3 years. And then when you see them again, what's the first thing that they say?
We should hang out.
We should hang out.
Yep.
So
fair call.
That's something I've kind of seen personally, is where, you call people, hey, I'll call you back. And they don't want to call back.
Yep.
Right. And a lot of it comes down to what you have to offer them. Right. Unfortunately, if the conversation with you doesn't help them earn a living or make a paycheck or help them professionally, you'll find that a lot of times people just don't respond, or they don't make the time. Which is why I like what you're doing, because none of you talking with someone for 30 minutes would professionally benefit you, right? I mean, it might, but I think there's a lot more benefit for the people that ask to speak with you than for you, who, like you said, is heading towards the sunset of your career.
Yep.
Right. So you've kind of reached a certain point to where helping people isn't necessarily benefiting you, but you still make the time. Right.
Absolutely.
And I think it reminds me of like the Dr. Phil, or not Dr. Phil, Uncle Phil. Mm-hmm. Sorry, wrong Phil.
Wrong Phil.
Uncle Phil. We don't want to be Dr. Phil.
I appreciate you.
Uncle Phil. And it's the same thing where he purposely does what he can to help Will become a better man, in a situation where he's unguided prior to moving into to the Bel Air house, right? And I think that really it speaks volumes to who you are as a person, but also to your commitment towards the community. And one of the things that I kind of picked up from Mike when Mike was in here was he does it because there is this sharing of information. Mm-hmm. And the one thing is, when you're in cybersecurity, there's a lot more people trying to break into your house than people will probably like. And the nice part is, when you have a community of people that you speak with on a regular basis, like with ACTRA, for example, you have this group of people that share intelligence among each other, right? And I've seen a lot of like Ryan Murray stuff where he talks about the state actually has different entities that cooperate with one another to share information. And what that really means to me is that it allows these different organizations to share information to become better equipped to handle we'll say the adversaries.
Absolutely.
And the way that I see this, this conversation going is the things that you have that you said it yourself, one person out of a room of 60 actually reached out to talk to you, right? Well, if that's consistent, how many, and those are all security professionals in that room, right?
Yep.
That means less than 1/3% of the people in that room actually actively, seeked you out. So the way I see this is where we can talk and share the information that you have that maybe people just didn't have the time to reach out to, or maybe they didn't have the confidence, maybe, right, to reach out. Now they have the ability to get those nuggets from you without, on their own, right?
I understand. Cool.
So that's my main goal. I'm actually really excited that you're here for a couple of reasons. But one, because it actually ties into a conversation that I had with Mike.
Okay.
So I wasn't aware of your current role when I had reached out. I thought you were CISO, Director of Security, something like that, right? Mm-hmm. And then as I was doing my research, what I want to talk about, you're actually in something that I think is fairly new, in a new thing, which is, I guess maybe better if you explain it, because I know what I want to ask about it, but your role is acceleration to market.
My actual title is performance acceleration, and it's performance acceleration for the cybercraft team. The CISO organization is called Cybercraft, Cybersecurity Compliance Risk and Fraud Team. So my whole focus is just around the cybercraft team within Intuit, and it is a brand new role and position that my CISO Atticus Tyson carved out within the environment. And there are two focuses, one more heavily weighted than the other. The first is talent. We understand that in order for us to succeed in what we're doing, we have to attract, integrate, train, and retain top-tier cyber talent out there. And as you're aware, there's lots of challenges within the cyber market regarding talent, not only in terms of the unemployment rates for cyber professionals are still fairly low. They used to be non-existent, but still fairly low. But if you ask 15 cyber professionals how to break into this field, you get 156 different answers, none of which completely agree with one another. So how do we figure out how we become a destination for cyber talent? How do we figure out how we put together an ecosystem to actually not only uplift the current talent, but to build talent within the environment from non-traditional sources in the environment? How do we partner with non-traditional sources for talent? You mentioned me being on the advisory board for AZ Cyber. How do we partner with an organization like AZ Cyber to help uplift and create feeders and pipelines, not just from colleges and universities? So that's a large part of what I do. But there's another smaller piece associated with it, and this has been more self-definition as well as having a thought leader as a boss in terms of what he's allowing me to do. And I've said this to my boss directly. It's like, look, I've had your gig. Okay. Actually, as Converge CISO, your role used to be one of the 4 arms that actually rolled up into my gig, because I used to run BC business continuity, IAM, as well as physical security, executive protection, as well as information security in all my old gigs.
Executive protection for the executive team members of the organization.
So as I tell people, I used to affectionately run the guns and the geeks. So
like Secret Service.
No. They're not so secret and can be fairly interesting. Yeah, I remember my background in self-defense martial arts. It was something that made my life a little easier when I was fulfilling those roles. Those are stories that I don't tell that often. But I'm in a position where I'm a little older than a lot of my peers, closer to my boss's age. And while my peers are very experienced, having over 20 years of experience, I've got almost double the experience of most of my peers in cybersecurity, with a couple of handfuls of exceptions. So it allows me to take a half step back and think about the problems strategically regarding how do we deliver cyber services and capabilities in a manner that is truly supportive of our business needs and allows our business to accelerate. Because, as you're aware, most cyber organizations are viewed as a speed bump, or a roadblock. How do we truly become an accelerator? How do we think about the problem differently? How do we organize differently? How do we automate accordingly? How do we take a half step back strategically and say, is there a better way to do this? Now, I'm blessed to have a group of peers and a boss who think about this regularly. But part of my gig, because it's in the function and because I'm no longer in that operational break-fix mode every day in this role, is to take that half step back and think about the problem maybe a little differently than we're used to, and see if I can't at least point us directionally in terms of what we need to do. So that's part of the gig.
So what I like about that role is I think it's a newer role, right?
Oh yeah, I've been in the role for 18 months. 18 months, maybe closing on 2 years. The role didn't exist. My boss created it and asked me to take it. So let me see, beginning of 2023, I think. But yeah, it's under 2 years.
Has that role existed prior to you having it in your current role?
No.
Have you ever seen it before?
No.
That's what I want to talk about.
Okay.
Because you wrote an article about velocity.
Ah, yes.
Right? And in the article, you describe motion versus movement.
Yeah.
Whereas motion, the way I took it is putting out fires. Everyone's just doing something. Everyone's working on something, but there is not a common thread that people are marching towards the movement aspect.
Yeah.
Did I read that wrong? Or?
I think you read it correctly. I will use a different analogy because most organizations will say, well, clearly we're moving towards a common thread because, we have a strategy or I'm told what to do, etc. So I want to bring it up a level, or as we say it into it, I want to go broad so I can go narrow. Broadly speaking, motion does not necessarily imply forward progress. I can sit and vibrate in this chair, and I am in motion.
You're not going.
But I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Movement requires directionality. And there's a term, as we talked about in physics, it's called velocity, because velocity is speed in a given direction. It implies directionality. And I think there are many organizations who are either looking at the problems very tactically and saying, well, clearly because my boss is telling me to do this, I'm moving in and supporting the strategic direction. Or clearly because I'm putting out this fire, because it's not burning, I'm moving in the strategic direction. And despite the fact that person A next to me is moving in a different direction and person Q is putting out a different fire, but because my bosses are telling me that, or not telling me to stop, clearly we're moving in the same strategic direction. And it's really difficult for organizations to think about problems strategically, particularly security organizations.
I don't know why.
Yeah, well, I'm going to give you two reasons, and I want to hear yours. One is because we're too busy playing whack-a-mole, and two, we have a feeling that we're Atlas. If we stop playing whack-a-mole now for half a second, the world will end. The sky will fall. The bad guys will get in. That's why we're not taking vacations, balancing with our families, and burning ourselves out within the environment. And in that type of mindset, and there are other reasons combined that we're not, that we don't necessarily train to look at it, and that organizations aren't only beginning to look at it strategically, or security strategically. For that particular reason, I would contend that most security strategies are nothing more than tactical or operational plans that you've put the label strategy on. because you aren't tying the pieces together and tying them back to the business. So that's me. You tell me you know why. Talk to me.
Well, I think I know why. I don't know if it's the answer, but I'm going to give you
probably a good answer.
My opinion. It's that businesses exist to make money.
Of course.
If you're not making money, you're not a business, right? So the goal for every business is to earn, right? So how do you earn? You put out product, right? Well, how do you put out product? You have to make it. You have to develop it internally. And we'll just say it's an application, right? It's a customer-facing application. And this is something that I told Mike, and I said, Wall Street is the reason security is a tough world, because what you have is this snowball effect downhill where organizations are focused on making money to meet their number. And how do you do that? Well, you have to create a product. Well, how do you do that faster? You make it faster, right? And how do you make it faster? Well, you just throw more resources at it. And you throw these resources at it, and what you find is that a lot of times products come out to market that aren't battle tested. And then customers buy that, right? But it hasn't been, there's issues with the software or the application that was sold that have to be patched later. So now the responsibility, because your product is missing a certain type of either functionality or feature or something that would give it a better posture in the security world, now has to be given to someone else to do patches later, right? And then in the case like vulnerability management is a huge area for a lot of organizations, right? There's a lot of companies that focus strictly on vulnerability management and pen testing. So if you're buying software that was rushed to market because you wanted to say AI as much as possible so that way you can sell the product first, what you'll find is the output downstream is a product that could be somewhat faulty, could have vulnerabilities associated with it, and then you have organizations doing their best to keep up with maintaining the level of security as an organization that they need as a result of all these different vendors that they purchase. And
I'm going to say your answer doesn't surprise me, and I believe it's very wrong.
Okay.
on multiple areas. And I don't mean to diss my host.
No. So here's the thing: is you've been doing it for 40 years.
Yeah.
You said that, right? I haven't been.
Your answer is not uncommon.
Okay. But why is it wrong?
Okay. I believe security has positioned itself and thinks of itself as being above and beyond the business. I'm a security professional. That means at my level, I am the senior security business leader.
Okay.
And that my job within any organization is to do the same thing that every leader is attempting to do, and that is to maximize value to my shareholders and stakeholders.
Yep.
And the only way that I do that differently from the other leaders is to make sure that we create value so that we can continue to push good product faster to market. And what we don't necessarily do as cyber professionals is we will get in our own little bubble and say, this isn't Fort Knox. And because it's not Fort Knox, the leadership of the business are morons and that they just don't get it. Versus, okay, my job as the business leader is to understand what the business is trying to do. Here's a hint. The business is not trying to be a security business. Here's a hint that if I try and build Fort Knox, which I can do, I will shut down the business, I will not have a paycheck, and your daughters won't eat tonight. So my job is to make sure that the business understands in language that they can understand as related to their specific goals and objectives, what the challenges and risks are so that they can make informed decisions. I used to say as a CISO, the only time that I fail is if a business leader can credibly say, I didn't know. The business always, telling a business that something is risky is like telling a business that the sky is blue. Every business goes out there, you're involved in one, and accepts risk. If you are risk averse and want to accept no risk in business, congratulations, fold up your tent and go home. every day you're out there accepting risk. So telling a business leader that this is risky is telling them that it's Tuesday.
Yeah.
What I need to tell them is, here's the nature of that risk and why it's a risk. Are you comfortable with that risk? And in the decades now that I've been doing this, we still suck at that. And then when we suck at that, we blame the business for not understanding. Just like most security professionals don't understand P&L, they don't understand sales funnel, they don't understand mark-to-market accounting or anything of that nature. Okay, you don't expect me to understand that within my business cycle, but you expect me. I expect you as the CEO to understand what the output of the WAF is here, and if I don't agree with you, then I assume you're a moron versus, okay, what is the risk? And have you communicated that risk appropriately? And when the business says it's okay, I want to accept it, then it's not our job to diss the business. It's our job to make sure that we manage the risk to that acceptable level so that the risk that we've communicated here doesn't grow as big as your studio. We, as a profession, struggle to look at the problem that way. And because we don't look at the problem that way, we get burnt out, we complain, we feel unappreciated. Sorry, guys, that's part of the gig, and I think part of that articulation doesn't sit on the business. It sits with us, and bluntly, I've been beating that drum for quite some time, and we're only beginning to see that change. Now, is there an element of nobody appreciates the firemen until the house is on fire? Nobody appreciates the policeman until there's a burglary? Yeah, that is the nature of the work we have signed up to do. And every policeman or fireman understands that within the environment. So I don't want to be on your forefront. I don't want to get the kudos within the business. What I want, to be honest with you, is an environment where you make the assumption that we're doing all the right things because I've got things running like a top as best as I can. But just like the policeman or the fireman, you're not going to call me unless something's burning down.
Yeah.
My job is to make sure two things. One, that I'm available and can respond and make sure that the grass fire doesn't become a plane fire here in Arizona. Or two, there are things that you can do around your house, like clearing brush and things of that nature, to try and prevent the fire from occurring. Am I communicating that appropriately to you to try and keep the fire from burning out of control? We don't look at the problem that way, and then we get pissed at the business when they don't listen to us. And that's not the business's problem. That's ours. I'm going to get off the soapbox right now.
No, I like that because I like when people tell me I'm wrong. My wife does it all the time, so don't worry.
I've been married 33 years to the girl of my dreams. Just get used to it, brother.
Don't worry.
I tell people, my normal disclaimer when I go speaking is I've built a life knowing exactly two things. My wife and son love me unconditionally, and I can be wrong about absolutely everything else. Yeah. So,
well, I don't think you're wrong on this. I think you maybe just fine-tune perspective,
please.
Right? For me, at least. So maybe going back to it, would you say that some businesses, because the communication internally isn't good enough, they unknowingly accept the risk?
Well, again, who is the, it is, it is egotistical for a cyber professional working for a business to say that it's not, the risk they're accepting isn't good enough. The owner of that risk in any business is the senior business professional, read the CEO or his or her designated representative. So I take a half step back and say, who are we? I want to point to you because you made the statement, but it's truly we as the profession. Who are we to say it's not good enough? What are you basing that on? Is it because it's not perfect? Dude, I haven't been perfect in a whole long time. And like you said, just ask my wife. Okay?
Yeah.
So who are you to say it's not good enough? That's not your call. And in this profession, it's never been, unless, of course, it's about the security team itself. The only risk I accept is for the stuff that I own. Okay? And who are you to say it's not good enough? Versus, it's not where I want it as a security purist. Well, guess what? As a sales purist, you want revenue to increase 1,000%, week over week. Congratulations, that ain't happening. Okay?
Yeah. Okay. So I think that comes down to just accountability for...
Absolutely not just accountability, but yes, you're absolutely right. And there is a piece we should talk about regarding that accountability in the current litigious environment. But it also comes down to mindset.
Mindset of the security professionals?
Yeah.
Okay.
We have a mindset that if you don't listen to me, you're an effing moron and I'm out. Wrong.
Well, that's any engineer. That's anyone.
I won't. The only reason I won't formally agree with that is because all of my time is in cyber. Will I tell you I have experienced that from engineers collectively across the board? Oh, hell yes. But the only thing I can attest to is the cyber side.
Okay.
So that's why I will stop there. But it's like, oh, I'm out. Excuse my language. Bullshit. Okay? That's not the case. I don't agree with you, therefore you punt out. No, that's not the gig. The fact that you didn't clear the brush around your house doesn't mean that when the fire comes, I'm not going to show up and try and put it out for you. That's the gig, and that's what we've signed up for within that environment. Now, what you did say regarding accountability resonates with me greatly. We have a hard time because we don't articulate well, and because many businesses have struggled with that concept around security. Is okay. Look, I'm making a recommendation based upon these things, not just the fact that I've been doing it since Christ was a corporal, as we used to say in the military, or that I have X number of years experience in here. Here's the facts and the data. Here's my recommendation. You as a business owner have every right not to accept my recommendation, but you need to own that
risk.
That risk. I will continue to secure the bejesus around the environment. When it goes wrong, you need to own it. Do you mind if I tell a war story?
No, go ahead. Those are the stories that I want to hear.
So, in my early days as a
captain?
No, as a CISO. In my early civilian days as a CISO, I worked for a great man named Clyde Thomas. My first gig here. Clyde taught me how to be a junior executive and then a senior executive. He was my boss, then became my mentor, and is now my dear friend. This is the guy who the phone rings right now and he says, I need you. I'm gone. My wife knows this. I would walk through fire for that man. He has the distinction in my mind of he never lied to me. And I tell people that's also, he didn't use those mamby-pamby wiggle words that, tap danced around, etc. Always gave you straight answers. And he would come up and sometimes, I know what you're trying to do right now and it makes perfect sense. I don't need you to do that. I can't have you do this right now if it's not clear. I can't tell you why. And if it's not clear why in 3 weeks, come back to me. Because, he had information I couldn't get a hold of. You want a boss to be that straight with you across the board. I don't have to guess, and he's very clear, and he's honest to a fault. Love the man to death, but that's not the story. I had set up in my first gig a risk acceptance program. And I said, okay, I had 4 lines of business, and if you wanted an exception to policy, which incurred risk, the senior vice president in charge of that line of business needed to sign the risk acceptance. And if it crossed a line of business, it needed to be the CEO. And the CEO said, I'm not signing anything, so you need to go make him happy. And I had the absolute perfect bell curve in terms of my 4 lines of business. I had 1 line of business that says, if Kim has a problem with it, I'm not signing anything. Go figure out how to do this in a way that Kim is happy with. I had 1 line of business that was rubber stamping absolute everything. Yes. And I had 2 lines of business that were operating the way you want as a CISO. And say, let's have a conversation. let me tell you why I'm concerned. You come tell me what it is you're trying to do, and let's see if we can't come up with a good solution. Because if no is the first answer, a good CISO and a good security team knows that how has to be the last. In some cases, I came to them and said, hey, okay, how about if you do it this way? And they're like, okay, cool. Or, yep, I see why you need to do it that way. It's still risky, but let's put it forth, and I will support it for these, and if we do these things, etc., because you have a good reason. Other cases, we just agree to disagree. I said, okay, that's fine. I see where you're coming. We're not going to get there. Mount it, and let's see what your SVP says. But you want those conversations. So, guy rubber stamping. I walk in one morning to work, and my boss sat like I was on this end of the hallway. He was across the hall. So I walk into work, and I used to duck my head in first thing, any issues? And when he would hesitate, it's like, okay, what aren't you telling me?
Yeah, there's something.
I walked in this morning, and he was putting down his phone and just shaking his head and smiling. Said, what's going on? I said, you should put your bag down, and then I need you to come with me. I said, okay, fine. Put my bag down. He said, we're going to go up, talk with the CEO. I need you to trust me. Don't say anything until I ask you a question. And I'd been working for Clyde for 2 years, and I trusted him, period. So I said, that's weird. I literally said, that's weird, but okay. Yeah. So we went upstairs, and I opened the door, and the CEO is in with the business line unit leader who was rubber stamping. And he points to me and said, he should be fired. I don't know what's going on.
The rubber stamper said you should have been fired.
Yes.
The guy that was default auto-opening everything?
Yes.
Okay.
So I sit back down, trust my boss. Apparently there had been a minor outage that cost us revenue and also cost us a potential contract for someone who he was bidding for work. And he's yelling and he's screaming, and the CEO looks at my boss, Clyde, and says, care to comment? And Clyde looks at me and says, did you know, Kim, about the risk of configuring the system and doing it this way? Yeah, boss, I did. Did you communicate that risk to the business line leader? Oh, absolutely. Did you recommend that they don't do this? Yes, sir, I did. And he opens up his folder that he brought with him and pulls out and sits on the desk the formal risk acceptance form. And said, is this the form that so-and-so's? Yes, sir, it was. He says, you go back to your office. So needless to say, I wasn't fired, but...
Was the other person fired?
Oh, that's a different story.
Okay.
But accountability is key. Okay, you have a right, this comes back from my GI days as well, you have a right to make any decision that you deem appropriate for the business. You don't have a right to hold portions of my anatomy to the fire for your decision, particularly when I informed you of what could happen. And oh, by the way, what I told you could happen actually did happen.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm sorry, and I will push back on that hard. So yes, accountability is absolutely key.
So I like that story.
Me too. I still had a job.
For a few reasons. But I want to ask, is would you attribute your relationship with Clyde to part of how you're so direct today?
Yeah. Part. There's a...
There's another story.
No. It's... Part of it is less Clyde. Clyde, I think, showed me how to survive. Well, let me back up and try and answer that better. Yes, in the fact that Clyde taught me how to be this direct in a way that didn't get me fired. Because if you think that this is direct, you should have seen me at 37. Okay. Yeah. Clyde taught me how to maneuver within a corporate environment. I'd done some consulting between the military and the time that I went in-house. But he taught me how to maneuver within a corporate environment appropriately, establish those relationships appropriately, and communicate directly in a way that didn't slap people verbally in the face. And he taught me how to do that, showed me how to do that because he was masterful at it, and gave me the room to make those mistakes as I was growing up as a junior and then senior executive. So, so yes, in the fact that he taught me how to do it in a way that didn't get me fired, which I'm grateful for.
Because you probably would have been fired had he not.
Even with my years in consulting, and there were only a few, my nature was and is, nobody dies based upon what I do today. And when I was in my 20s and early 30s, that was not the case. I was an intel officer. I called it wrong. Even if I call it right, people may not come home. I call it wrong, more people may not come home. If nobody dies, why can't we be straight with one another? Yes, what we do is important, but why can't we be straight with one another? If it's broken, it's broken. If it's not broken, it's not broken. And, my GI days are such that if it's your call, I don't have to agree with your call, but make the effing call. And when it falls apart, then own it. Another story.
Go.
I was, in my last security gig, I was also designated the crisis manager for the organization, and which was interesting because it meant that during a crisis, my boss, the chief operating officer, went to work for me, and I let my deputy CISO run security while I was managing the chaos. We had something that was elevating to a crisis based upon a risk that our CEO had accepted. And we were about to declare a crisis and move because risks that I thought would occur did occur. And as it began to bubble up and we were fighting it, the one thing that I give my CEO high credit for is he walked into our command center and said to me, first, by the way, thank you for not saying I told you so, because you did tell me so. Now how do we fix it? Not that I would have said I told you so to him, but that was his way of telling our team, this isn't blame. And if there's blame, it sits on me as the CEO because you told me. So that's nobody is getting fired today. We'll fix this together. There's a lot of power in that. That level of accountability just eases the ability and allows people to work freely in that environment. So really love that.
So I told you in the email, I think a couple of nights ago, about the books, right?
Yeah.
Have you read them?
One of them, not the other. I have not read Extreme Ownership, and I would not question any Navy SEAL regarding anything they've published because they live that pain. I haven't read Extreme Ownership because for me that's Tuesday. I'm an academy grad. I spent time pushing troops. I tell people I've built a career knowing how to do two things. I build teams and I take responsibility. So without having read the book, I would contend that if I did, I honestly believe that I've always operated under the premise of extreme ownership. If it goes well, my team is rocking. If there's blame, it stops here. And if it's mine, and you tell me it's mine, it's going to get fixed because it's mine. And you may not like it, so think carefully about that. Again, another story. When my auditor was talking to a business line leader, said this problem exists, and he said, I think that should be Kim's problem. And Sean, my auditor, laughed and said, I can see where you're coming from, but you do understand if you give it to Kim, he gets to fix it any way he wants, and he's going to fix it. As soon as the words came out of his mouth, okay, yep, tag, it's mine, I'll take it, because I fix stuff. I read everything that I can get my hands on from Cynic, including Leaders Eat Last. There was nothing earth-shattering in that for me, but a lot of that philosophy, as you can imagine, is how I grew up professionally. So for me, and I love Cynic because he tells his stuff in parable-like, easy to digest information and advocates philosophies that I've agreed with and I was raised with for some time. But yes, I'm a huge fan of Cynic's work, and nothing against extreme ownership, but I looked at the title and said, that's Tuesday. So
yeah.
If it's not Tuesday for you or anyone who's watching or listening, yes, I recommend it highly.
Yeah, it's not Tuesday for me, right? Because I don't have the same exposure and experience as you have. But what I've kind of picked up in posts that you made, especially with the velocity, right? At the very end, it says it starts with you.
Yeah.
Right. And I think when you kind of tie all these things together with extreme ownership, it goes back to taking responsibility and holding yourself accountable for things that are clearly your issue, and then things that aren't your issue, right, is what they talk about in that book. And to me, what that goes to show is that when you're in an environment that people have that understanding where everyone's accountable for their actions or their decisions, and everyone should be responsible for that, you have less of a blame game.
Yep.
And the minute you can have a safe space where people can go knowing that if they say something that isn't the popular opinion, they don't get burned at the stake, right? And what you'll find is that people in those situations speak up more often.
Yep.
And when people speak up more often, that turns into this diversity in thought, right? Which leads to businesses that have people that are more willing to be open for the benefit of the business, whereas in the situations where culturally there's no accountability or no reasonable accountability between executives and below, and there's a lot of finger pointing.
Yeah, and it gets down to, in some respects, Lancioni, there are some positives and negatives there, but his 5 dysfunctions of a team is worth reading, and there are various books that dovetail off that. But Lancioni talks about the concept of trust, and if you look at his pyramid, where there's a lack of trust, there's a fear of conflict, and that fear of conflict can be everyone going yes in the meeting and not meaning it. And when there's a lack of conflict, then there's a lack of commitment, because I may go like yes, like this, but I really don't mean it, and then I'm going to slow down in terms of how things drive within the environment. And when there's a lack of commitment, there's a lack of accountability, and you say, who did that, or why is this happening? And 5 people point in 17 different directions, and all of that leads to lack of results. So it all gets back down to, you use the term a safe environment. I will echo Lancioni's term, that anchors on trust. I need to trust that we can, and I believe that this is a reflex that our society bluntly has lost in recent years. And I will go no further than that. We need the ability, or have lost the ability, to disagree on a professional level peacefully, or about an issue, and I'll make it personal, peacefully. We used to, one of the things I did in my last gig is we used to jokingly say we moved like a dysfunctional family, just in the fact that behind closed doors is like 7 brothers and sisters. When we would go to my staff meetings, we would shut the door, and anybody could throw anything on the table. And every now and again, I actually had BS flags, and we would throw BS flags on the table.
Like the yellow flags?
The yellow, www.bsflag.com. You can buy them. They're still available. Yeah. And we would throw them back and forth, and we would fight like brother and sister, and we'd put issues on the table. It's like, okay, now that we're done, this is everyone's had their say, this is the direction we're going to go in, this is why, I hear, etc. We walk out of that meeting, there's not a millimeter of air between us, and I expect everybody to be driving in the same direction. You've had your say, you've been listened to, but it's like with brothers and sisters. There's only people who can yell at your brother or sister, or you. Have somebody else come say, oh, it's go time.
It's like, it reminds me of Home Alone. The very first one.
Yeah.
When they're getting ready to go on their Christmas trip.
Yeah.
And, the uncle is like saying stuff to the brother, and then Buzz, is beating up on the other people, and then there's like the one brother who's actually Macaulay Culkin's real brother.
I didn't know
the kid with the glasses. It looks like Minkus from Boys what's Boy Meets World?
Okay,
he
yeah.
kind of looks like him. It's actually Macaulay Culkin's real brother. And they're all fighting, but at the end of the day, when they realize that they left Kevin at home, they're like, "Where's Kevin?" And
Shit stops.
It's like the family comes together to solve the issue. So there's a lot of this, dart throwing happening, and social or like tongue-in-cheek things, and just like scissors and
it just
blades
stops.
coming out.
It just stops. And the one thing I loved about my teams when doing that is we had to have the trust with one another that you could say anything in that room. It was never personal. Hell, you have no idea how many times BS flags got thrown at me. You could say anything in that room. You put it on the table. It's not personal, and we can go hang out together and make it work once we're done. Everyone gets their say. Everyone puts it out there. But think about the level of trust that you have to have in the organization and the people around you to have that level of brother and sister fighting in order to decision without it getting personal. And we did.
I think it's a cultural thing, though. But you can't have that cultural...
But who sets the culture?
The leaders.
Exactly. And we talk. It's about that part of that making time for one another, part of that commitment thing we talked about with one another in the blog post that you mentioned. Excuse me. We talk at a high level regarding establishing cultures, that want to move faster. Mm-hmm. In order to move faster, I need to trust to a certain extent that you've got my back. Or if you say you're going to be here, you're going to be here. And we need to have that level of openness and discussion. And while we talk a good game about it, most organizations genuinely suck at it and don't pay attention to it. Mm-hmm. And I see a lot of organizations, and I mentioned this in the blog post, who have separated the concept of velocity and the concept of team. Teams move fast, and teams will move faster and farther than an individual. But a team is not a group of individuals under the same administrative organization. A team is a group of individuals with shared goals, shared objectives, shared desires, shared commitment and shared passion. You may be here for different reasons than me, but as far as in terms of taking that hill, we're all here to take that hill. Yeah. This is my part to take that hill. That's your part to take that hill. And if any of us gets left behind, we have failed. There are organizations who are talking about velocity who aren't spending time on, again, seeing these first team principles and the importance of team. And then they wonder why they're failing.
Yeah, I don't think it's unexpected that without trust, right? From my perspective, trust is like the currency of business.
Yes. Right? Actually, trust should be
the currency.
And where we forget is we focus on trust of our customers and forget that level of cohesiveness and unity inside is also what makes the business go. You've got to make risk decisions, and you have to make uncomfortable decisions, and you're going to have to make decisions in terms of, for financial and monetary reasons, etc. But if you treat me right and you're upfront with me, it gets done well. I think it was one of Sinek's books. I've read them all, and it might be Leaders Eat Last, where he talks about a company that was going through a downturn. He names the company in the book. I just can't remember what it was, where he went out to the employees and said, okay, right now I can either lay off a bunch of people.
Yeah,
it wasn't there.
It might have been Leaders Eat Last.
But it was one of his books. It wasn't
about furloughing.
Yes, and what he said is the leadership of the company, and was very honest about it. It says we can either let go people, or everybody
takes a pay cut.
Okay, not a pay cut. Takes 2 weeks of unpaid leave.
Okay, that's what it was.
2 weeks of unpaid leave. And he said, including himself, I would rather everybody hurt a little than anyone hurt a lot.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting, the unexpected impact or effect of that, where you had folks who could not afford to lose 2 weeks' pay. So there were people going in and saying, hey, we know Jack can't afford 2 weeks. So how about if I take a third week without pay so that Jack only has to take 1 week? And they were swapping in terms of days so that some people got more unpaid leave because they were mutually supportive within the environment. The cuts were enough that they didn't have to let go anybody, and the loyalty and commitment both to the company and to each other to be mutually supportive was so strong that they actually bounced back and the company survived and thrived within the space of a year. That story, in my mind, my problem with that story is the reason that story is in the book is because it's so unique.
It's rare.
It's rare.
Yeah. Especially in the tech world.
Yeah.
Because how often do you see a company misses their quarterly earnings and then the next day half of the team is gone?
Yep.
And then, the other sales reps or the engineers are stuck holding the bag for the people that were working on other projects with other clients
and managers. And I use this term, and I use it deliberately pejoratively. So-called leaders, people who call themselves leaders, but aren't willing to make the hard decisions that leaders make. They're really just managers with glorified titles. Will give you 150 justifications as to why it's done that, and what it really amounts to is it's a freaking excuse. And I have, as you can hear, I have a problem with that.
Yeah, but I think because it goes against the principles that you've kind of set for yourself as an individual.
Yeah.
Where it's like, so with your Army experience, right? And Simon Sinek talked about this as well, where when a brother in arms is down on the field, there's no question on who will save them. You just know that they will be saved.
Yeah.
Someone will run out and get them and risk their own life to save that person, right?
Yeah.
And he explicitly calls that out in one of his books.
Yeah. And his TED Talk. I remember that with his TED Talk. He uses that example of the officer, lieutenant running back in and grabbing the sergeant and kissing him on the forehead before he got medevaced. Yeah.
It's like a brotherhood, right? And because there's that inherent trust of, I trust that if I am down, someone will come get me, and therefore if someone else is down, it is my responsibility to go get them.
And that's what Lencioni tries to replicate with his first team principles. Okay. That says your first team are your peers, not the teams that you run are your peers. And again, we collectively talk a good game about that. But that means I don't throw you under the bus, and if you need, I am there, and I'm responsive to you, and I make sure that you do not get left in the dust. We collectively, and by we, I mean business folks everywhere, I'm not picking on a firm, etc. We talk a good game about that, but that level of commitment is something that I would long to see amongst businesses and organizations.
I think a lot of it is people are selfish.
Yeah, there's an argument that says that what I am describing is antithetical to human nature, but it is equally antithetical to have the situations that happen within a military organization happen where people will not leave you behind. Culturally, as an organization, we have established, and again, none of the armed services is perfect. I understand those pieces. They continue to have struggle, et cetera, and they have struggled in the past. So I'm not saying the military is perfect. But they have set as a cultural standard to hold themselves up to that this is how we treat people and this is how we operate.
Yeah.
And that overcomes a lot of selfishness in the fact, or a lot of human nature, if you will, because in this culture, that is not tolerated. The same way it is not tolerated for a medical doctor to walk past a medical emergency on the street and not do anything if he or she is capable of doing so. That culture, that professional culture, says that's wrong. There are a lot of businesses who put words on the wall regarding how they operate that the leaders still struggle with that, and where the rubber meets the road, they are cowards and walk away from those principles. And yeah, I use that term. They're cowards.
I don't disagree with you. I think there's a lot of self-interest when it comes to the professional world, where it's either me or them mentality, and I think it's persistent in a lot of organizations where it's my family or yours, right? Yeah. It's self-preservation,
and I don't understand why. That's
I'll tell you why.
Please.
At least this is my opinion.
No. This has been all about my opinion and your opinion, so please.
It's the culture created by the leadership that snowballs down to this scenario where people know that it could be them or you at any point, right? And that there's not this camaraderie between the different teams and the different people to work together.
So and we'll use the example in Cynic's book. It could have been them at any time, etc. But the leadership set a culture that says that's not the case. And they thrive because of it.
But in the case where they don't set that precedent, you get the fallout.
And I think collectively, not to put blame anywhere, but I think collectively, 15, 20 years ago, a lot of people bought into the Jack Welch style at GE. In fact, there's a book published just a couple of years ago, 2022, and I can't remember the exact title, which I should because I'm in the middle of reading it right now, about the things that this is what Jack Welch got wrong. Yes, we talk about how he turned GE around and the pieces, etc., but it was also the forced ranking, as in ranking people A, B, or C, and every year the bottom 10% got let go. So if you were in the 11%, you stayed. If you weren't, you were gone. But congratulations, you're starting the year in the bottom 10%. And if you finished there, you lost your job. And what that did as a culture to the environment was just terrible. But unfortunately, what it did for the stock price, etc., was great, and everybody wanted to be Jack Welch. And I think a lot of businesses tried to replicate that success and took on the my way or the highway, promoted or gone, and stopped looking at people as human beings versus looking at them as just another resource to manage. And I go back to Admiral Grace Hopper and says, you manage things and processes, you lead people. And we incentivize people not to lead. And I think Welch was the poster boy for that.
So that's just a really good example of money is the root of all evil.
If we want to go biblical, it's not that. That's not true. It's the love of money that is the root of all evil. That phrase. Yep. I can't quote it anymore. I used to. One of my best friends has a doctorate in divinity and would know what that line is and where it comes from. So I'll have to ask her later. So,
but it's just interesting that you said that they try to take what helps the business be successful monetarily, right, at the risk of the people that work there.
Yeah, and the two are not mutually exclusive. Let's get back to where we started, because we've gone far afield from just security, talking about leadership and velocity, which is good because I think they're very useful topics that we ought to be talking about. But let's get where we started regarding vulnerability and communicating to the business. Okay. There is, I think there are many cases businesses make the assumption that the two are mutually exclusive. Not necessarily the case. If we think about the concept of left of bang and shifting left within the environment, the example that you gave regarding not doing enough quality up front, meaning I have to repair and patch the vulnerability later, et cetera, within the environment, there's data that shows that had I fixed it right the first time here, it costs less from a resource standpoint than having to go back and repair it down here. So how do we, from a security standpoint, from a people management standpoint, from a leadership standpoint, remind people that leadership is a force multiplier? That managing people will get you through the day, but leadership is a force multiplier. It allows people to shift left, innovate more, and be more productive up front. There's a statistic, and I cannot remember where it comes from. There's a statistic out there that says from innovative environments, the praise to criticism ratio, the higher the ratio in terms of praise to criticism, the more innovative your environment is. And I believe the figure was if it's 5.6 to 1 or better. So for every time I criticize you,
there's at least 6 good.
There's at least 6 attaboys out there. The ability for that environment and that team to perform and innovate and ideate out there is exponentially better than anyone else. An indication that, if I'm sitting there leading versus just beating you to death like a boss, figuratively, not literally, or just managing you as a resource within the environment, versus giving you the freedom to innovate, giving you the freedom to move forward, giving you the freedom to, to embrace the mission and the camaraderie and taking that together and just humming and moving and just, it's a beautiful thing. And it's something that I think business in general has forgotten or isn't focusing on or considers to be trite, but it works. It works every single time. Another story. I had a young engineer. I'll just give his first name. His name was Sean, and fresh out of college, he had my last gig, and it was Friday afternoon, and we had an outage within some of our domain controllers. So we were participating in the IT incident. Come to find out that Sean had tried to push an update to one of my domain controllers and pushed it to all of them and shut them all down. And so his boss, Steve, comes in and says, hey, this is what happened. And I go, shit. I said, okay, stuff happens. You apologize to the IT team. It's no longer an IT incident. I didn't work for them. They were my peers. It's now a security incident. You buy pizza for the people who are staying in the evening. I'll cover it here, and we'll just take it over and run with it. I'll go call the CIO, and we'll make it happen. And I call the CIO. He gives me the friendly, he's a wonderful guy. He gives me the friendly ration of grief, let him know what's going on, and we fix it. Time I get off the phone, Steve's back in my office and says, can you go talk to Sean? Yeah, what's going on?
He took it hard?
He'd been on the job for 5 days and was convinced I was going to fire him. So I looked at Steve like, he's just a boss. He doesn't know you. It's all good. Mm-hmm. So I wandered down and said, look, you're never going to get fired for trying to do the right thing for the company. You weren't being mischievous. You weren't being stupid. You tried to do the right thing. Now, okay, you make the same mistake again, and I'm going to chew you up one side, down the other. And what you've lost is your weekend, because congratulations, you're the engineer who's now on call while IT tries to fix this problem. But you're fine.
Yeah.
He became one of my best engineers. Because he was responsibly fearless. He knew that as long as he was trying to do the right thing, which included making sure somebody else knew and having a plan to walk back things, which he learned quickly, he could go find problems and he could figure out how to address them. And he knew that he had our support. He became a red team guy at Salesforce for a while and then moved on to do some other things. But he's a phenomenal technologist. Mm-hmm. But just knowing that, look, there is that level of, we go back to that nasty T word, trust. I trust that you are always trying to do the right thing. You need to trust that as long as you're trying to do the right thing, it's not that there won't be consequences, but that these consequences aren't going to devastate your family. They're not going to devastate your career, Excuse my language. Shit happens, okay? Let's roll with that. Yeah. And how many leaders truly set up those environments, particularly in cyber these days?
I don't know.
Too few would be the right answer right now.
Okay. I would guess there's a handful of people that, and I think Mike based on what we talked about.
Mike is he's absolutely in that too few category.
Yeah, because we had talked about all these different things, and like we talked about what he does to try and, he mentioned he doesn't hire, or not that he hasn't hired someone or outside the organization since 2017.
Yeah.
And I said, Mike, like, aren't you worried? Like that.
Why?
Well, my concern was that there's just a lot of people with the same internal experiences. So when you think of like diversity in thought, you think of like people coming in from different organizations and different experiences and how that contributes to the team to be successful. And I said, well, aren't you fearful that at some point, like everything that happens at your organization is like in a bottle? And he's like, no, because we have these in place. And he mentioned their training and how I think the gentleman's name is Richard, I think, drives a van to Vegas every year. And Mike said, yeah, I'm not driving to Vegas this year, so I'm not driving the van, like the Econoline van type of thing. And, they make time for all their people to go to these different events, and training is top priority.
It has to be.
Right? So I was like, oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Now that makes sense, right? So he kind of told me, yes, you're right in some ways, but no, you're wrong.
And I get where you're coming from. I mean, there's a value proposition in having a company where you can grow and mature for years, if not decades. But if you're not careful, you get into groupthink.
Yeah.
And this is the only way to do it. And large companies that, all the leaders have been there 15, 20, X number of years, et cetera, as long as they're still going outside of their borders to learn more, great. But many of those companies become enamored with their own success and say, we don't necessarily need to learn a different way. The other problem that you eventually run into in those type of organizations, or rather for insular organizations, is eventually you get to the point where there's no growth inside. And like, for example, every gig that I've taken, I've told my direct reports, you really in security here, I'm the CISO. There's really only 3 ways you can advance. I get fired, I quit, or I have my brain aneurysm. So my job is to train you to be me before I'm ready for you to be me. And if I do this correctly, at least one of you is going to come up to me and say, hey, Kim, someone just offered me more money than I thought I would ever make to be you somewhere else. What should I do? At which point my answer will be, dumbass, take the gig and when's the party?
Yeah.
That's happened to me 16 times.
You've had 16.
There are 16. Shit, that's not true. One more. There are currently 17 current and former CISOs who've come up under me.
Really?
Of which 4 of them left my employ while I was still sitting in the chair. But that's part of my legacy, And 1, 2 of them spent time in Fortune 500 companies, and they still talk to me. So yeah. So for me, that's what we should be doing. I should be training people to be better than I am, better than I ever was elsewhere. This is good stuff.
Is it rewarding to look back and know, when you started, you had, I forget his name now. Was it Lloyd?
Clyde. So you had Clyde that kind of set the path for you, right? And you're a product of a lot of the things that he showed you, like with, playing chess in the corporate world, if you will, right? 3-level chess.
3-level chess?
Yeah. 3-level chess. Old Star Trek, sorry. But playing 3-level chess, yes.
Okay. I'm not familiar with 3-level. I have a Star Wars. I have the Darth Vader over there. I play chess. Like,
no disrespect, Fern. It's older than you are. Don't worry about it.
Is it? Okay. I figured it'd have to be because
I'm old. Damn it! Don't worry about it.
Okay, but is it rewarding to think that like you are one of his, and then when you look back and you say, I've created 17 newer versions of me. Like,
rewarding is probably the wrong adjective in this case. Obviously, since I mentioned it is something that I take pride in.
You keep track for sure.
And I consider it part of my legacy and my give back. Those things are absolutely correct. But there's a fundamental part of me that's still in, but that's what we're supposed to do. So, yeah, I'm proud of it. I hope that has helped make our profession better. But I'm still that's what it's all about. And, my fundamental nature says I'm supposed to make it better for the next person. Mm-hmm. It's one of the reasons I'm sitting here. If there are things that I can do to help with that, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. So, it is definitely something that is definitely something that I keep track of. It's definitely something that I'm glad of. It's definitely something that I'm proud to have done. And again, we're probably splitting hairs on the words, but it's less rewarding and more a matter of, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah. Maybe the word is a little bit off, but I think it still aligns to the fact that you keep track and you know the number off the top of your head. At least, maybe it's not rewarding, right? Maybe I think that was the word I said. Maybe it's just more meaningful.
I like that word. Right? It is meaningful to me.
Because when you say legacy, assumes that there's something left behind.
Yep.
Right? And I like to think of it as like grandparents.
Yep. I like that.
Grandparents create their children who go out and find a spouse, and then they create families, and those families create grandkids.
Yep.
And then those kids grow. And usually the grandparents don't get to see their great grandchildren, right? But at least they see their grandkids.
Yep.
And I think maybe when you say legacy, like when you attribute legacy to family, you think of how I look like my grandfather when he was my age, right? There's a part of him in me.
Yep.
Right? And when you look at it from the world of security, you have 40 years of experience, but those 40 years of experience have created 17 people that can attribute a lot of their personality or their leadership qualities or how they approach cyber as a result of how you train them. But interestingly, that from you comes from someone else. Yeah. So it's like this generational pass of information, and maybe people don't know about your mentor and who took you under his wings, right?
Yeah.
But they know that you helped them, right? And it's interesting to think that there is a grandfather of security to you that they have inherited.
There are several. I've stood on the shoulders of just great men and women. Clyde as my first boss. Rich Owen, Stash Jarocki, and the list goes on. Just great people who just been there, done it hard, and didn't let me go too far afield. So one of the people that I would like to invite is actually Rich. So I saw that he has 3 books out. So just 3? I thought he had a 4th.
It might have been 4.
But yeah.
So
Rich is good people.
He has them online for like $75. You do a 10% coupon if you buy them all at once. So I'm probably going to buy his books, and I'm going to have him come in here. He's going to sit in that seat, and he's going to sign every single one of them.
There you go.
You
go. You've been warned, Rich.
You've been warned. I'm coming for you.
He's great.
So I didn't realize that he was part of your journey. So it is interesting though, like when you think about cyber as like a family, right? When you treat the business as a family, where like Simon Sinek said, you wouldn't lay off your kid, you wouldn't send them out in the street. You would find a way to help them become better, or if you didn't have enough money to feed them, you would eat less as a parent.
Yep.
Right? You would take on that risk or that responsibility of making sure that the future generations can thrive.
Yep.
Right? So I look at that in security, where you make the time, like you came here today, right? I'm not necessarily a cyber professional. Like I work in the world of tech and cyber and things like that, but you made time for a complete stranger, right? And that's my favorite part about this is we've never spoken,
yep.
Face to face, And everything that we're talking about is based on like ideas that I had and things that I'm interested in learning about, but not just for myself. It's for those other professionals that want to be great leaders. And I think at this point, one of the things that they can at least take away is it's the leadership style that you have fosters an environment that creates other professionals that help you create that legacy, but also by having, we'll say, an environment where people are held accountable and they're responsible for their actions, like the rubber stamp guy, right? Mm-hmm. You have to create systems and processes that allow you to explain the risk, and whether or not they accept it is on them. It helps to where the goal of having everything be Fort Knox becomes, well, they know that we're not Fort Knox because they made this choice, right? So it kind of, hopefully people that are in cyber and that, if they're listening to this, they hear that a lot of your stories come back to these environments that create success with the 5.6 to 1 ratio, really come from places where people aren't, they're not judged for their actions, like Sean, right? I think was his name. They're not judged for their actions. They're viewed in a manner of, if they're being responsible and they're doing what's right, that as a leader, we just fix it, right? And we move on. And it kind of, to me, when you mentioned that story, it stuck out like, have you ever fostered a dog or fostered any pets?
No, I haven't fostered them. I have them, but I haven't fostered them, no.
So one of the things, when we were in Texas, my wife was big on fostering.
Okay.
And we would foster dogs at least once a month, right? We had Harlan, we had Mickey and Minnie, we had Little Warren. We had all these different pets that came through our house. And what I found interesting was there were some cases where you would walk up to these dogs and they would almost pull back, as though they were scared of someone approaching them.
Yeah.
But once you fed them and you pet them and you did these other things with them, they kind of realized that you weren't there to hurt them.
Yeah.
And they became dogs again. They became, a better version of themselves because they knew that they weren't going to be criticized, not as a dog, but they weren't going to be,
abused
or for, hit for being a dog. And I think, not to say that, humans and dogs are the same, but I think there's a lot of shared characteristics where.
Yeah, it gets down to, in my mind, Fern, to that thing we said earlier in terms of the leadership as a force multiplier. I would ask anyone listening to this, what is the, as you go and read and educate yourself, what have you done to improve your leadership quotient? Not your management quotient, but your leadership quotient in the environment. And then the next thing I would ask you is, what have you done today to help and support anyone who can do nothing for you? I think if as a community, cyber community, if we have the vast preponderance of us answering those questions positively, as a community, we would function better and be able to better serve the organizations and the greater good that we purport to be serving out there. So,
and just so I'm clear, was the leadership quotient the praise to?
No. Just in general, let me change quotient to skills, ability.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because when I think of quotient, I think of one number and another number.
Oh, fair. Leadership can be taught. You hear 3 theories regarding leadership. Okay.
I don't know these, by the way.
Trait theory.
Okay.
Leaders are born, they're not made. I have had the privilege of knowing and serving with some natural born leaders. They do exist, but they're rare. And quite frankly, every military branch and service academy assumes that leadership can be taught and that you don't have to be a born leader. Great events theory. Think back to George W. Bush and Rudy Giuliani on September 10th, 2001 versus how they were viewed on September 11th and 12th and going further, and how they, based upon that great yet tragic event, rose to the occasion and their leadership skills, etc., began to thrive and flourish. Second theory. The third theory is transformational leadership theory, in terms that leadership skills and abilities, I hate to use the language example, but it's, like language, can be taught, can be learned, can be pursued. Like I said, most militaries and organizations believe in the transformational leadership theory. You can choose to be a leader and choose to build those characteristics and those muscles, etc., within the environment. Most technologists in general, security technologists in specific, don't spend time building that muscle and rely on their technical capability and prowess, which will get them quite far. But it shortchanges our profession.
So which one are you?
I'm an absolute transformational leader. It's a choice. Everything that I am, I have learned. I've learned from my mentors, my family, both my wife and son, as well as my mom and dad. I learned at the academy. I learned in the military. I'm a product of making the choice to go down this path and trying to stay true to that path. Yeah. It's all choice.
What's interesting is, as you're talking and I'm listening to you, and in my head, I'm thinking of the words you're going to say, and I'm pretty close.
No surprise.
I'm pretty close.
I'm nothing if not predictable.
No, not in a good way. I just think, which is another favorite part about doing these things is I feel like over a period of time of just talking to someone without any distractions and without my cell phone buzzing and no motive other than to learn, right? You get to sit down and hear people more so than you would when you see someone walking down the hallway and say, hey, how was your weekend? It was great. How about yours? Great, cool, I'll see you later. Or like the friend, we have to hang out. Okay,
sure.
When, right? So when you sit here for the time that we've sat, I kind of, based on the things that you've said, it helps me, at least I feel, understand you better, right? And my favorite part about that is, as you're talking in my head, I'm like completing your sentences, and I've done pretty well so far.
Good.
Like I figured you'd say transformational, and there's other phrases that you've said where, like, in my head, I thought that's what he's going to say. Cool. So I like that.
So given that, ask me the one thing you have yet to ask me. There's always one question when I do things like this that I'm not sure if I can ask this. I don't know if I want to ask this, etc. So ask me the far out, risky, big air quotes, etc. question. Ask me.
No, I don't know if it's necessarily risky. I think it's more so introspective.
Okay.
I think so for myself. Like recently, when I thought about, I had this idea the other night that, have you ever heard the phrase? You can't win if you don't play.
Yes.
I personally think that's a load of garbage, because what it alludes to is that playing will result in a win, right? And in my thought, so when I had this idea, I thought anyone can play to win, right? But winning isn't about getting lucky. Winning is about making fewer mistakes than your opponent. When you play football, if you fumble less, right? You score more, you fumble less. You don't get sacked. Baseball, if you don't strike out, it's the mistakes that cause people to lose.
Okay.
Right? So when you say you can't win if you don't play, that assumes that by playing, you're guaranteed to win in some extent. But really what it comes down to is the probability that you're going to get lucky. So in my mind, when I was thinking about this, a specific example is, you ever play Monopoly?
Yeah.
Do you ever just pass go and collect 200 and keep going?
As in, don't stop on go?
No, like when you play, you roll the dice and you go past go and you collect the $200 and it's all you do.
Okay.
What are your chances of winning Monopoly?
Oh, slim to none if that's all you do.
Exactly, but you're playing. So you can't win if you don't play. But playing isn't about, winning isn't about playing. Winning is about having strategy. Winning is about having intent. Winning is about having that intent turn into a process, and that process being a strategy. That strategy then turns into the thoughtful execution of not making mistakes. And by nature of making fewer mistakes, you elevate yourself to a place where you beat your opponents. Winning isn't about getting lucky. It is for the lottery, right? But winning in general, chess, checkers, any sort of competitive sport, isn't about just showing up and maybe winning. It's about having a strategy. So what I don't like about when people say, well, you can't win if you don't play, it's like, no, you can play, but you're not going to win unless you have a strategy.
Interesting. You took that phrase in, I think, a different direction than it was meant, but your comments are valid. I believe that the phrase is due to focus on, basically, if you want a chance at winning, you have to show up. So it talks to, you need to actually show up. But what you're talking to, which is equally valid, is showing up is not the end.
No.
It's the beginning. It's the first step, not the last. Well, I would agree with that. It's worth remembering that there are folks who struggle with showing up. You and I talked before we started recording regarding imposter syndrome. And that can deter people from playing, if you will, to continue the analogy, or showing up. But that's the first step. You still have to figure out how you're going to get through the game, how what strategies you're going to employ, how you choose to play the game, and what the objective is in terms of doing that. So no, I agree with that. I hadn't looked at the phrase as potentially misleading people, but I can see where it did. I'm sorry.
I just did that. Remember I told you I was picking your words? Misleading is what
that was the one. Yep.
So, and I'll give you a really good example, and an example that people, hopefully listening can even attest to, is that getting a job in cyber.
Yeah.
You can't just apply. Right, you can't get a job in cyber if you don't apply. It would be the parallel there.
But there's more to that. How do you make yourself you're right. How do you make yourself the best candidate?
Because I want to get the job, so as long as I apply, well, I can't get the job if I don't apply. Like, no, that's the start. You have to make it there. You have to get that part done. But there's a lot more things that go beyond that.
Yeah, it's the first step, not the last. I can see that.
So it's like gambling is like you can't win if you don't play. Like no. Like people don't just show up with their money and throw it on.
Well, it's you are right. You can't win if you don't play, but playing is the first step, not the last.
Yeah. In order to win, you can't just show up.
Yeah.
Right. So that was an idea that I had, but it wouldn't be like like you said, that hot question or that the introspective question. I think so the whole idea of playing to win. It came to me because I was thinking about just life, right?
Okay.
And I was sitting there, in bed trying to fall asleep, and I couldn't fall asleep because I kept thinking about, like, as you get older, you have this expectation of. So the reason it came to me was because I think it was the beginning of this week was the 26th week of the year.
Okay, halfway through then.
Half of the year is gone. And I thought to myself, it's not just half the year is gone, half of my life is gone, right? It was really weird to think about because, I'm coming up on 40, and it's like, realistically, that I have less time ahead of me than I have behind me.
Okay.
And the idea was half of my life is gone.
Okay.
So how do you make the most of it? Right? How do you make the most of the little bit of time that you have left? And I'm like I said, coming up on 40, right? So when half of your life is gone, the thought that I had was you have to make everything matter more, or everything matters more now. Like when you accomplish something, because you have fewer days ahead of you, it means more to you as a person to be successful, right? Or to have some sort of success than if you were 20 and all you did was fail, right? Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like as you move along the spectrum of life, when you get to a certain point, you know that what you have ahead of you is fewer than what you have behind. So it's like the little things matter more. And for me, the idea that I had was like, it took me about a month and a half to do all of this. And in this, the thought that I had is that it's the first time in a while that I was actually, proud. Like, I did all this, right? And I did it by myself, right? I figured out the camera stuff. I figured out all the other stuff. I'm not a professional photographer or videographer, but I just took the risk and I figured it out. And I came, all of this was made, right? And in my thought, I was like, oh man, I'm actually super excited about this, right? Because now I have people like you can come in, we can talk. And, I never text my parents often, right? I'll text them every now and then and we'll go over their house. But if you were to check my phone, like I don't text my mom or my parents every day, right? I don't talk to them every day. But I took a picture of this room and I sent it to my mom. And she says, it looks great. And for me, it was something small like this, this room, where I looked back and I was like, if I would have done this 10 years ago, it would have been like, okay, cool. Like I did it, right? But now it's like, it's smaller than, what most people would kind of say this was a big accomplishment. But to me, it's like, this is actually really cool. Like I've had this cello for 20 plus years and I found a way to kind of incorporate it into the set. And for me, it's kind of, that was the thought is, as you go forward, there are things that you will do and things that you will accomplish that might be small compared to what you've done in 40 years. So the question that I had was more so, if you ask for something that most people don't ask, is like, are you afraid that like the best days are behind you, or that you've done so much that there's less to look forward to? Whereas for me, it's like I could build this room and I can be happy about it because I've got 40 years. But you said Mama Bear's going to call you home one day, right? And when you talked about creating a legacy and having this history and all these 17 people that you've essentially helped develop, like, was that the pinnacle? Like, or is there more? And if there isn't more, does that bother you?
Interesting question. I will start with the answer to the first question. Am I worried that my best days are behind me? No. But probably not for the reasons that you might imagine. Let me try and put this together in a way that makes some sense. I remember, I can't remember who I was talking. Yeah, I remember when 1st of July 1983, my parents dropped me off at the academy. And my dad, don't tell my dad's story that often. My dad was a POW in Korea, did 2 tours in Vietnam, had 2 Purple Hearts, and won the Distinguished Service Cross, which is our nation's 2nd highest military honor behind the Medal of Honor. And my dad has some stories, military and otherwise. My dad shook my hand and said, remember who you are and what you're about. And growing up as a kid in the 60s and where this country was, and I will say it unfortunately seems to be going back to, in arguably one of the most liberal states in the Union. I grew up in Massachusetts, and I've had crosses burned on my lawn. Mm. I grew up in Massachusetts, and I was set upon by dogs as a kid. And we went through our issues with segregation and busing and discrimination, etc. And that was a fact of life for me in the mid-'60s and the early '70s and beyond. One of the things, so I was brought up in the nobody's going to help you. Mm. Don't expect anything. Work for anything that you want and work honestly. And take care of your family. Those are the tenets I was brought up with, and I saw my dad do that every single day. So I went to work as a soldier and then beyond with that level of expectation, and my job was to take care of my family. I don't expect anything. My job was to take care of my family, and I did that. Along the way, I was blessed to find a career that I enjoyed doing and that I felt had some meaning and purpose, beyond when I stopped wearing funny green clothes, and found companies where I could ply my trade and my craft and hopefully make things a little better. For me, the part that says my best days are behind me from the is there another ring that you're shooting to grasp? The answer is no. I've done the things that I've wanted to do. I've been a CISO, which was the job that I set out to do within my professional career. I've been an educator, and I'm still an educator within the environment, and spent some time building a degree program and doing other things of that nature. So my challenge is more it's like, I think wasn't Frank Lloyd Wright, but the bronze statue of the end of the trail, the Native American warrior on the horse that's just slumping in the saddle. In that respect, it's like, okay, my battles are fought. Now what? Not because my best days are behind me, but I'm trying to figure out what I want to do, because I'm almost 60, but that means I've still got another at least 20 years to go play. What do I want to do with that? I've spent a career focused externally being
the people outside of yourself.
Yes, including my wife and my kid, etc. And I'm proud of that, and I have no regrets about that. For me, it's more a matter of I'm trying to figure out what I want to do with my third act. And it's not that my third act is going to be worse or less meaningful than my other acts. I'm not sorry that those acts in my life are over, because I like to think I did some good. And it's time for others to pick up that mantle, because the bones creak a little more in the morning than they used to. But for me, it's not that my best days are over. It's confusion, because I never expected to be at this point of contentment about my life. And I'll use the term, though I don't think of that often, accomplishment in my life, this young. My daddy worked up to the day he died. And my brother who's not a little younger than me, is on a similar path and is doing well, taking care of his family, etc. But I'm at the point where it's like, okay, I can retire now if I want to. I've taken different career paths that have taken me, what people look at as weird, is I stepped off of that let's just go grab the brass ring path and keep doing that, because it's like, no, I've done what I wanted to do here. So for me, it's less a matter of my best days are behind me. It's like, no, I did what I wanted to do. I remembered what I was about. I've accomplished those things that were important to me. And I did it about 15 years younger than I had planned to. So now what? So it has been my nature even when I was in the seat to give back. It's been my nature even when I was in the chair to educate. So what I'm doing now here and for people and for Intuit and other places is more an extension of what I've been doing for almost 40 years. For me, it's more a matter of I'm now in a position to think differently about the rest of my life. And other than my wife's not allowed to leave me, and she feels the same way, so that's cool.
She's been married for too long; she can't leave.
Yeah. Who you telling? Same thing here. You find someone who's willing to put up with your shit that long, do not let them go. And that's I tell that to any man out there. And other than that, it's like, what do I want to do? And I've been in a situation where I believe I've been true to my heart, I've been true to my principles, and I've been true to my beliefs for my entire career. And because of how I am wired, there's a lot of that's reflexive motion. Mm-hmm. Because if I'm not true to those things, I wouldn't do them. I'd walk away from the gig, or I would change, because for me, staying true to self is the most important thing. Mm-hmm. So I've done that. I've managed to be reasonably successful at it. I believe I've made a difference doing it, and I'm happy about that. It's not that, oh my God, that's behind you, don't you miss the chair? It's like, well, I like sleeping at night, and I like my phone doesn't ring in the middle of the night. Yeah, there's a part of me that reflexively says, I miss it because it's familiar, but I don't miss it. Don't you miss the time you had? And I had a lot of fun when I was pushing troops in the military. Don't you miss the time? Yeah, I miss that because it was familiar. But my knees don't miss it anymore. Yeah. So I'm in it's not that my best days are behind me. I've done a lot of good, and I like what I've done, and I feel I've stayed true to self. I'm just trying to figure out what this next act looks like, and do it in a way that's not reflexive motion. Mm-hmm. Even this, which is good because my reflex is to give back, there's a part of that's reflexive motion. I don't regret it. I love that you reached out, and I love that we've had the time to spend together, just like I love it. I was talking to the cyber interns at Intuit and gave them a half hour, 40 minutes yesterday to talk about life, the universe, cyber, and anything. I had a couple of them come back and say, can we do follow-up meetings? I met with one of my 7 mentees yesterday within the gig. I love doing that stuff. I love continuing doing that stuff, but that for me is ingrained motion. The fact that it is reflexive doesn't mean it's bad. That's part of who I am and what I'm about. Mm-hmm. Stepping back and saying, okay, that's good. You can keep doing that, but you don't have time and cycles and energy. What else do you want to do? What hobbies do you have? What is this foreign word called a hobby? I don't know what that is. What do you want to do with your downtime? Same answer. What is this foreign thing called downtime? And setting that direction is hard. Yeah. And so for me, that's the challenge. My best days, I believe my best days, I woke up on the right side of the dirt. My wife said she loved me. My paycheck didn't bounce. My badge still works. Or at least my computer logs me in because I don't go into the office in California every day. All 4 of those things are still true as of this morning. Everything else is bonus points. Yeah. And if I could say that tomorrow and the next day, it's a good day. So my best day was yesterday and tomorrow. And today wasn't bad either.
Kind of reminds me of the Ice Cube where he's like, woke up, didn't have to use my 8K. Today was a good day.
It's a good day. It's a good day. I put my shoes on the right feet. My pants are on. It's a good day.
Yeah, I think at least what I heard when you were saying that is, you stay true to yourself. Yeah. Right. But you also stay true to what your dad expected when he dropped you off. Yeah. Right. So there's a lot of to me, if I had that similar experience when my dad had dropped me off and said, hey, make sure going forward, this is who you are. And I did that, 40, 50 years later, I will look back and probably think yeah, I can be proud of what I did. And not only can I be proud of what I did, I know that my dad would be proud.
Yeah. Right? I think I know he was. So yeah, and you can look back and you can exhale and say, look, I don't know what anyone listening to this or you believe in terms of right, wrong, heaven, hell, afterlife, non-afterlife, etc. And I'm not going to go there. But at the end of the day, I can look back, and if today was my last day on earth, I could say, I did my best every single day. I stayed true to myself. And I'm going to look back and say, didn't turn out too badly. And that's all anyone can ask for. And if that's not good enough to whomever the right power or powers to be are, I can live with that. Because every day I got up and I did my damnedest. Mm-hmm. So, sorry it's not good enough. Put me on the path to wherever you want to put me, and I'll deal with it. But I don't regret what I did.
Because you took responsibility for it.
You always take responsibility for it. You have to. And it's more than that. I did it with best intentions and a good heart. I believe that. That's all anyone can do.
But everything kind of comes full circle, is because when you said if it were to end today, you're completely happy with it.
Yeah.
But you're happy with it because you take responsibility for what you did, and you don't have any regrets, right?
I genuinely don't. My dad used to say he served because he had no choice as a child coming out of the Depression, and it was the only way to get out of the situation he was in. He served to give I and my siblings choices. Mm-hmm. But we were all raised with, you own the choice. If you make this choice, you own the choice, you own the consequences, and whining is a cop-out, and bluntly is a waste of energy and time. So that's why we talk about extreme ownership. I was raised that way. My brother's the same way. We are own it.
Yeah, it's just a generational thing because of your father.
Yeah. It's not just a generational thing. It is because of my father, yes, and the standards of conduct he raised us with. Extreme ownership, that's Tuesday. Mm-hmm. The academy just reinforced that. My service time reinforced that. But that's the starting point. I'll tell another war story about my dad. In fact, I'll tell two. My dad got captured on December 16th, 1950, in the Korean conflict. As the Chinese rolled over, etc., he was captured and made a prisoner of war, and he spent the rest of the war in POW camps. My dad was 20 when he was captured. He was a brand new buck sergeant, and he was made hut commander, which meant that he was responsible for the other 17 bodies in that hut as a 20-year-old. By the way, part of the reason he was responsible is because a lot of the senior non-commissioned officers were ripped off their stripes because the senior person got more attention from torture and interrogation within the environment.
So you kind of disguise who's who.
And this was just a post-segregation army.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
17. 20 years old, 3 years later, on two broken knees with a broken arm and maybe weighing 95 pounds, he brought 15 of them out alive. Because that was his responsibility. And doesn't matter how you got there, doesn't matter the situation. He brought 15 of them out alive after 3 years. Yep.
Really?
That's my dad. So I like to tell people my dad wasn't just my hero, he was a hero. And so I'll tell you the other end of that.
What's that?
So my dad, retired out of the military. We're living in Massachusetts. My dad spent time as the first African-American vice president of a New England-based bank, a bank whose name I will not mention here. And my dad, in the 70s, ran the money room. This was in the day where the way you settled, banks was you physically moved money and checks, etc. I mean, you picked them up and moved them to other banks, etc. This acquiring and authorizing transactions that happens now, it's all manual back in the day.
Yeah.
My dad never took a day off other than scheduled vacation. I saw him take one sick day. In 1980, we thought he had walking pneumonia. And so he went to Devon's and got himself checked out. And that's the day that $34,000 in 1980 dollars, which is about $150K today, went missing. Now, nobody accused my dad, which was right because he didn't take it. And it was his processes that found the individual who took the money.
By the way, there's probably no cameras. Were there cameras there or no?
Long story.
Okay.
Long story. Needless to say, they still fired my dad for failure to supervise and blackballed him all up and down the East Coast from D.C. north. So there was a period of about 6 months with a mortgage tied to the bank, a car, and 5 kids, 3 of them in public school, one that has health challenges, where the best job that my dad could get was as a security guard or a grocery clerk. And I spent 6 months and never heard my dad complain and never heard him. I mean, we sued, we won, and there's another story behind how we won. That's for a different animal.
That's for the next episode.
Well, the short version is the money had never left the bank. An executive vice president had ordered his AVP to take the money out of the master vault and put it in a safe up on the Mahogany Row because, and I quote, that up needs to be taken down a peg. But that's another story. But I never heard my dad complain. I never heard, it's like, okay, this is the hand I'm dealt. We're going to sue, but meantime, I got to keep food on the table. I got to keep a roof over our head. Get it done. Don't whine, don't complain, just get it done. And I was the oldest, and I knew it took its toll on him. But, 1980, my dad was 50 years old, walking, for 8 hours a night, walking a beat as a security guard, and then that morning going out and working in grocery stores for upwards of 16, 18 hours a day.
So he carried 2 jobs at the same time?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I thought you said the only jobs he could get was these.
Those were it. At
the same time.
That was it.
Oh, okay. I was thinking that's all he could find, but it was.
That's the only. I mean, he was blackballed, as in nobody would hire him. Nobody would hire him to do anything. I mean, he'd grown up in the financial sector and he couldn't get a job in banking or finance. Okay. And never heard him complain. It's like, I'll fight it. We fought it and won. I'll fight it, but until I fight it, I got to get shit done. That's how I was raised. Take responsibility. It is your responsibility. Take care of your family. Whining is a waste of time. Just get it done. So, my dad's my hero.
I can see why. I think, like you said, when you're taken as a prisoner of war and 3 years later at 95 pounds to somehow escape with, I think you said 15 other people.
Yep. Not escape. I apologize. At the end of the war, when North and South Korea actually split, quick military history.
53, right? 50 to 53?
53.
Yeah.
Right on what now is the inner-Korean border, there's a little bridge that was called the Bridge of No Return. And what happened was that is the bridge across the border where prisoners of war were released. And they were told, once you cross this bridge, you cannot return. If you choose to go home, you go home, but you don't return. So my dad crushed across the bridge of no return in November of 1953 when the armistice was put in place.
So you basically went from December 16th of 50.
Almost 3 years.
Almost 3 years to the date.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. 15 out alive.
The other, I assume, died from nourishment
long stories there.
Okay. But you know them all.
I do.
And you weren't around for them.
No.
So he sat and told you these stories.
Yes.
I think that's a good story by itself. I think there's you mentioned Clyde, right? I think Clyde was kind of like the continuation from the professional world, but I think really it's like the stories that your dad was able to be like a Superman, right? And have all these things that he can tell you that he's done and things that he's been through, and then you've witnessed as the I think you said oldest of 5, right? I think my wife is the oldest or not the oldest, but she's the oldest of 3 in her immediate family. There's stepbrothers and stepsisters, right? There's older, and so my wife has lupus.
Oh, okay.
And I would imagine her mom does too, right? And she's still alive, but a lot of her days are spent in bed, sleeping. There's no energy, right? And when she was a child, her mother had the same thing, but her mother and father split, right?
Oh, okay.
So something with her story specifically is when she was, 10 years old, she was kind of carrying the family because mom was asleep, mom wasn't awake, right? So she was kind of doing the things like walking brother and sister to school, and doing the things that a parent would have done if they were present or awake in this case, right? And I think one of the things that she's kind of taken on from that is taking responsibility for everyone when it's not her problem, right? So a lot of what you've said, being the oldest of 5, right? Having your father, the stories of him and what I'll say is discrimination, right? For really what it is, in a time that was 20 years removed from Martin Luther King's time, right? And there's this transitional period, but it still exists, right?
I won't tell you the story of something similar that happened to me, but that's for part 2.
I could imagine there's a lot of stories, and when you had mentioned your father being captured, the first thing I thought was he the only black guy there?
No, not who was captured, but in his hut, yes.
Okay, so to me that that stuck out to me as something that I thought about. The first thing I thought about was that. But I think there's a lot of parallels, and I think a lot of people attribute their professional success to mentors and people that they watch. Nowadays you probably get kids that will talk about how Mr. Beast is their mentor. My oldest, she's 10, or she just turned 11. She loves Mr. Beast Feastables, right? She talks about how Mr. Beast is awesome, right? He's a YouTube guy, and all he does is like charity work, and she loves his chocolate, and she looks up to Mr. Beast because of all the nice things he does to people. So modern day, I think kids kind of look up to people that they can visually see or find through the internet and everything that comes with that. But I think for your generation to be able to sit there and have those stories come from a first person perspective, right? It's to me what I heard is that all the great things that you've done and the people that you've helped were just a mirror reflection of the thing that your father would have done in the same position.
That's what we're supposed to do.
But that probably is something he used to always say.
No, but it was something he always demonstrated.
Yeah. So it's like from childhood, they always say that like childhood trauma is the result for a lot of these people that have, say mental issues, right? But what they never talk about is how, being raised in a loving family in a family that struggles together, in a family that has, been at the bottom, right? Where everyone's back is up against the wall. No one ever talks about how that creates strong people.
Yep.
And what I'll say is interesting about that is, so Lester is going to be here tomorrow. And when I was doing research on Lester, it was interesting that I found out that he was raised by a single mother.
I did not know that.
He was raised by a single mother, and as a child, he lived in Section 8 housing.
Oh, wow.
And so the idea that I had for Lester was, and I'm sure you probably know the phrase better than I do because it's just more so just in my brain somewhere, but it's that tough times create strong men.
Yeah.
Right? Strong men create great times, but then great times create weak men, right? And so my talk track for Lester is more so about how do you break that cycle where strong men are created and you continually create strong men without the tough times? Or how do you prevent men from becoming weaker because of the good times the strong men have created? So I think there's this period, and to me it's interesting that maybe you would fall in the same category as you have direct proof and evidence of tough times and what they did for you as a child, right? And how that's attributed to your personality and who you are as a person when it comes to responsibility and I use responsibility and accountability, but more so looking internally on how you can be responsible for this, right? And then what that does is that helps you create these environments that have, this ratio of where people are appreciated versus criticized, and then how that propels a company. Oh, and by the way, your role at your current role is one where the whole goal is to find ways to improve the velocity, right? But how do you improve the velocity without the background that you have? Because you can't learn that. You can't learn those struggles, right? You have to experience those struggles.
Yeah, but you can do some things for not just from a leadership standpoint, but my answer to your question would be, I think it's something I said earlier. What have you done? What have you done today to help someone who can do nothing for you?
I think a lot of people would answer nothing.
And the solution to that problem to create strong individuals in good or great times is to change the answer to that question. Because that way you don't lose touch with the fact that my great times aren't everybody's, and that people are struggling, and that there's purpose beyond self. And if we can remember those things as human beings, we might do okay.
I think we will.
I hope so.
You know how we know that? Because they just look at your track record.
Oh, I hope so.
You like that? I had all kinds of questions, right? But we're already going on, 2.5 hours. So
up to you. I got to tell you what. I'll give you one more. What you got? I didn't realize we'd been going that long. You'll have plenty of material.
Yeah, that's how it usually goes. Mike went for 2 hours and 40 minutes.
Okay. I got time, and
Andy went for 2 hours and 18 minutes. You just beat Andy.
I can beat Andy. Okay.
You now have second place.
There we go.
I know we covered a lot, and what we didn't really cover was you talked about taking your time to educate people.
Yeah.
Right. So I've noticed there's a lot of things that you do around recently with the kids in Yuma.
Yep.
Right. There's that. There's other things. There's the university work.
Yep.
There's a few different things there. But that's all helping build the cyber community, right? And kind of bring more people into the game, if you will, of cyber than people that exit the arena. One of the topics that I had was, the CISO, right? What makes a CISO? And I think it's possible to cover that through understanding what you're teaching, right?
Okay.
So there was a recent event that you went to. It was a presentation, I think, actually here locally at the Expedient office.
21st Century CISO version 2.0.
That.
Yep.
I want to hear more about that because I feel like it will capture a lot of the stuff that you do with the younger generation because, obviously if you're 2.0, there's that assumed improvement from 1.0. And I don't think you talk about 1.0 stuff versus 2.0.
So in fact, it was almost to the day. Early in the community here, when I got here, there weren't a lot of CISOs. We were a dumping ground for data centers. And this was 2003. So ISSA was young. The senior executive level for security was young. So for a while, I was a go-to speaker for ISSA, as in they would schedule people. I was always supportive of making sure my team's memberships got paid and would send them to events. But every now and again, it would be hey, Kim, we just had a speaker bail for our Friday event. It's Wednesday. Okay, great. Do you care what I speak on? Yes, no, maybe. Okay, well, I don't know anything about that, but if you let me speak on this, I can speak. So about every other month, I was at and this is when the events were monthly, I was speaking at an ISSA event for a while.
Okay.
This was another case in May of 2009 where I was asked to speak at an ISSA event. And I was at my second company as a CISO, and I had been now 6 years in the chair. And I was looking at trends that I was seeing in terms of cybersecurity.
Is in risk or as in procedures or how would you define what you've
as in these were the early days of breaches. Okay. We were beginning, this is 15 years ago.
It's Target time.
No, it was like TJX time. TJ Maxx.
Oh, okay.
This is well before, Target was 2016. This is 2009.
Okay.
Yeah, so this was 15 years ago. We were beginning to see the beginnings of the breaches. We were beginning to see the professionalization of the threat actor. We were beginning to see security move out of the OSI layer and focus around data. In other words, we were beginning to see the beginnings of the data-driven economy. We were beginning to see the beginning of regulation with Sarbanes-Oxley, et cetera. And PCI had been around just for a couple of years. So all of these things were in their fledgling state. And we were still struggling then in terms of what were the requirements for a cyber professional to know. So the statement that I made back in 2009 is these are all trends that we see happening now, that we're in the early phases of. And what I said is over the next 15 years, because in 2009 I was in my early 40s, I was 40...
Don't date yourself. Don't date yourself.
No, I will. I'm 58 and proud. So I was 43.
Okay.
And I'd said, look, 15 to 20 years from now, this isn't going to be my problem. This is going to be your problem. So we're at a pivot point here, and if we don't take charge of these things, we're going to see the security role go the way of the VP of telephony, which, yes, there used to be VPs in IT in charge with telephony.
Strictly.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. They used to, telephony. That was a thing.
And everything else.
That was a thing. Okay.
Okay.
And it was going away around 2009. They were rare. And I said, if we don't decide what we want to do from a profession standpoint, how we want to recruit, and how we're going to respond, we ain't going to be around in 20 years. And it's like, you guys are the up-and-comers. Choose. I started earlier this year having, again, part of the role for acceleration, and I'm still tied in with a lot of the CISO communities out there, talking about what it means to be a CISO. Obviously, the Uber prosecution and what's going on with SolarWinds has created lots of kerfuffle. Lots of people talking about, I don't know if I want to take the role. We're still, which I think is unconscionable. We are still, we're seeing different pieces for regulation. We're still don't understand what it takes to make a good cyber professional. And as I was having conversations, I found myself referencing my 2009 presentation. And I said, okay, let me dust it off and see what's happened and what is happening. If you look on the breach charts, where they give you the bubbles in terms of the side of the breach, Choice Point and Hannaford and TJX, which were considered some of the biggest in that time frame, are now little bitty pencil eraser size compared to the huge breaches that have happened in the environment. The professionalization of the threat is still there. We are now in a state where we have 50 different 53 if you include the territories, security and privacy and breach notifications. Lawyers are involved all over the place. The threat has professionalized. We're still not communicating, and we haven't figured out whether we're a profession or a trade, though we've become a career. So a lot of my concern why I did this presentation wasn't to say what's gotten better or what's gotten worse, was first one, I'm not an idiot. Yeah, some of the stuff I talked about is happening. Two, but bigger than that, is this is eminently predictable. It was predictable 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. It's predictable now and is here. So if you believe that the trends are still occurring, understand that we're on a path where security professionals have lost their agency around security. Because given the regulatory environment, there is still a trend towards making sure we're compliant. And what I've been saying for decades is compliance is a matter of legal sufficiency. And legal sufficiency is always the bailiwick of the corporate attorney. So if you say it's not compliant and the corporate attorney says it is, the corporate attorney is right.
Yeah.
Now, compliance isn't the same as security, but there are a lot of companies that are actually starting with compliance and are more focused on compliance. We have yet to decide whether we're a career or a profession. And the presentation I did said, here are the characteristics of a profession. We're not meeting several of those characteristics. Here are the characteristics not of a career, but of a trade. We're meeting some of those and not all of those, but we've become a decent career right now. So there are a lot of folks who have entered, and I remember the days when we were advertising cyber as, you get to hack for a living and can make metric crap tons of money. And there's nothing wrong with those things, but we sort of lost the collective sense of community. We've lost the collective sense of purpose. And oh, by the way, all the people who are saying, oh my God, the sky is falling, we can get prosecuted. I'm like, that's Tuesday. That's always been part of the gig from back when I took it. So the fact that it's being realized right now shouldn't surprise you. And worse, in this data-driven economy, what we used to say is IT is paid to make things go. Security is paid to make things go securely. And if you're lucky, you get about 60 to 70% overlap. In a data-driven economy, remembering that data-driven economies only work if you continue to feed the beast. In other words, I have to continue to convince you, the consumer, to part with your data. And as soon as we stop doing that, the economy falters. So in order for me, it's true, still, you stop deciding to give into it your data for TurboTax falls.
Yeah.
Okay? QuickBooks falls.
Quickly.
MailChimp falls. Credit Karma falls if people don't trust me enough to give the data. So since the environment has to continue to be fed, then
it has to continue to be secured.
And it's now part and parcel, or more part and parcel of the role of the technologist, the CTO or the CIO. So that's 60 to 70% overlap is now closer to 85% overlap or greater. And when we're 85% overlap or greater, in an environment where I can't tell newcomers to the profession what specific knowledge, skills, and abilities they need and can't give them pathway, the question is, after spending all this time to separate out from IT, are we really now reintegrating with IT? And is there a need for a CISO position other than to make the S scapegoat? and only scapegoat. It's always been partly scapegoat, but only scapegoat.
Yeah.
So what I propose to the people at the table is, all that shit I was saying back in 2009, congratulations, we're here. And AI is accelerating, and we still haven't solved. So the short answer is we need to decide what we want to be when we grow up. Mm-hmm. We need to evolve to meet those needs. And, I use the phrase, look, there are 500 Fortune 500 CISOs. Duh. I would love to see those 500 Fortune 500 CISOs and several folks like Ron Green at MasterCard, Brett Arsenault at Microsoft, who stepped off the CISO path but are now evangelizing and senior emeritus folks within their organizations, come together and say, answer these questions. This is what the career looks like. These are the skills of what it looks like. This is how you get in. Because if 500 Fortune 500 CISOs actually picked a direction, the world would follow. Yeah. Yet we refuse because we're dealing with our own myopic, tactical, parochial needs. And we're trying to kill the tree by plucking the leaves by saying, yes, cyber jujitsu, good program. Girls Who Code, good program. What are the jobs you produce? Diversity, great environment. What are the jobs you're producing? Have you linked the skills to actual employment? Mm-hmm. Nobody's answering those questions. So a lot of the presentation wasn't, this is how we got better. It's about, we're losing our agency.
Yeah.
And if we don't do something about it, we're going to have challenges. So I concluded with, guys, evolve or die. We're here. And I'm now at the point where it won't be my problem because 10 years from now, one way or another, my feet are going to be up. So,
yeah.
Because
hopefully 20 years, right?
Hopefully more. Well, no. My feet will be up for a long time. I hope for 20 years or more. But if I'm still working at 68, I'm probably divorced, and I don't intend to get divorced because Mama's already told me I'm not working till 68.
Time to come home.
Yeah. So my feet will be up, and I'll be like, okay, So a lot of what I tried to do in that presentation was less the skill set piece, but more the guys, we've got challenges. Now that said, in that environment, unlike where we were 20 years ago, where I liken it to what got you there, what got you here won't get you there. We were leaning more on our tech skills and our tech savvy and risk savvy, et cetera. You have to understand the business. Yeah. You have to understand people. You have to understand leadership. You have to understand legal. You have to understand HR. You have to understand compliance. So pure play technical CISOs, there are a place for them in smaller, high-tech firms, et cetera. But if you don't understand all of those pieces and parts, particularly the business, you're going to get overrun.
Yeah.
And you're not, or you're going to be marginalized. And if you're overrun or marginalized in this environment, when something goes wrong, you will take the blame. Mm-hmm. So those are things I think we're getting better at. Shout out to SANS. I teach Leader 514 for SANS, which gets into things like this. So, shameless plug. I admit it freely.
Plug as much as you want.
But we teach things like this, and we teach it well, and not just because I'm one of the instructors, but it's a really, really great curriculum. But these are things that at the time, 10 years ago, if they existed, were looked at as an afterthought, or but I still need to go to DEF CON, et cetera, where we're now understanding, and people are understanding those leadership and culture things. They're critical. They're absolutely critical. So that change is occurring, and I don't want to, to the answer of your question, what's different? So in the fact that we recognize that needs to be there, I think is an improvement, because we used to talk about getting a seat at the table, but when we get a seat at the table, we didn't know how to act. We still acted like we were at the kids' table.
Yeah.
So that's good. The bad part is, guys, evolve or die. We need to take that half step back and begin to retake our agency. And part of that, and I'm going to preach a little bit more, is a sense of community. I think the reasons that people got into cyber, combined with COVID, have limited our sense of community. I mean, we used to just show up. I mean, here we used to have a regular happy hour for the CISOs, and I used to run a mailing list for people for cyber just to send out. COVID drove everybody in, and our sense of community got stretched. If we're going to retake our agency, cyber needs to reestablish its community. We need more people having these conversations, and having these conversations not just amongst old farts like me, but people who just have a genuine interest. And I'm glad people will get to see this on YouTube and listen to pieces, etc. That's fantastic. But guys, we need to go eyeball to eyeball. We need to look at the fact that just sitting here having this conversation,
it's not enough.
It's a starting point, because we're having the conversation in person, and we're establishing the rapport and creating relationship, and you can't do that by watching an asynchronous video.
No.
And if we're going to get better, we have to do more of that. So that particular presentation was what I called my old guy on the porch, get off my lawn, shaking his cane. Yes. Shaking his cane. That's me shaking my cane, telling people, guys, you got to fix it.
Yeah, and I think
off the soapbox.
No. You don't have to. You don't have to remove yourself from the soapbox. I think something that I told Mike, and I think it was Mike, is maybe it was Andy. There was a gentleman that came in with a place that I worked at years ago, and he said, silence is acceptance.
Yes.
And
I used to use silence as consent.
Oh.
Yeah,
well, now it's just acceptance, right?
Yeah.
Because consent assumes that acceptance is part of it, right?
Exactly. So no, I'm agreeing with you. Yes.
Yeah. And to me, when you said earlier, if you got 10 people in a room, they point 17 different directions, right?
Yeah.
But if you got 500 CISOs in a room, they'd probably point to 2,000 directions. Somehow, everyone's got two fingers that they're pointing in different directions, right? And or four fingers.
And it's, guys, choose.
Yeah.
And I think that there is that collective fear of being wrong, or that collective parochialism. But in many cases, I think it's just because they don't know. I remember when I was at ASU, we had some money. We had a grant, and we could build for lack of a better term, a Kickstart program for people to get trained on. And I had several people, some good friends, one former and one current Fortune 500 CISO in their various organizations in the room, and we were talking about what we could do. And I sat there and said to my dean, I said, now let me ask the hard question. So we're going to build this for you. We got the money to build this for you. We'll build it exactly the way you want it. Mm-hmm. So if we build this, you're telling me that you are prepared to hire these people, or at least look at their resumes and give them a job, right?
No.
Well, and then I pushed and said, guys, then tell me what it would take. And one of them, had said, and I said to him, look, Sean, you tap dancing. And I said, no, I'm actually not tap dancing. I'm avoiding the question because I have no idea. And I love the brutal honesty, but that's where we are. It's like, look, guys, you're running security for some of the biggest organizations in the world. And if y'all can't at least agree, how the hell are we, we're killing the tree by plucking the leaves. How are we going to make it better? Point into X number of directions, but somebody decide.
Yeah.
And then throw your weight and your money and your support behind it. But nobody wants to do that.
I think to tie it back to the very beginning, I think CISOs need velocity. Because right now there's just a lot of motion. There's a lot of people. There's absolutely a lot of motion. They can't decide on a direction. And like you said, it's almost like they need to come together and form some sort of charter or of direction and where they see it going. And one of the things may be, and this goes back to 15 years ago,
the security community made a conscious decision not to professionalize when it came on board, like, the Bar Association or the Medical Association or CPAs, et cetera, where there are standards of this is what you need. In order to be a CPA, this is the stuff you need to know, and the organizations, and if you don't do these things, you can't be a CPA. And there are also standards of conduct, the moral conduct pieces we have through different certification bodies, et cetera. But we made a decision not to do that in the early 2000s. And it was one of these passive, but it was talked about for a lot, but one of these passive, no. And there was a reason back then, because we didn't know what the job entailed. And because we didn't know what the job entailed, we didn't know what we needed. And because we didn't know what we needed, we didn't know where to go get it. And because we didn't know where to go get it, we didn't want to exclude any potential sources of that particular talent or skill. And if I professionalize, I may exclude sources for that talent or skill. Okay? And that was true 25 years ago. What's our excuse now? And right now, by the way, there's back in that time frame, there was a government report, and I reference it within the slide deck, where they were basically saying cyber is not a profession, and it's probably too early to call it a profession. Where they point, and they were right. There's a lot of hue and cry in CISO magazine and other places about that, but the fact is they're right. And the very reasons they stated back in 2008 or 9 or whenever that report was, it's still available online. I'll send you a link if you're interested. And whatever the reasons were, they're still true today. So, I'm told that I need these things to be successful, but it's point solution. I've put you in to do VM, and that's all you do. Mm-hmm. And I need you here, and I'm afraid to grow you. And because if I grow you, it takes you out of the position here, and I can't even tell you how to grow because I can't tell you what the requirements are, and you're already in the trade. So what do I do for the kid on the res who's using a third-generation computer, has his GED, and tell him what he or she needs in order to get into cyber? And even if I tell them, go get your Security Plus, there are people who will not look at him or her because he doesn't have a college degree. Same thing in some of the community colleges. Mm-hmm. Same thing in some of the certification orgs. You got lots of people. I hear stories every day. This is the individual who said, okay, I wanted to reclass career-wise, so I went back and got a second master's in cyber and was told that because you have no technical experience or chops that you can't get a gig. So went back and got 4 certifications, including the Security Plus certification out there, all on her own money, and was told, well, you don't have any experience. So if experience is the breaking point, then who's offering that experience, and what are the requirements that you're going to have me have so I can go get that experience? Mm-hmm. So we've created tremendous need. We need the bodies. We are telling people we need the bodies, and we're not creating the opportunities, and we're not being consistent. There's a guy out there named Ben Rothke, who I've talked with on podcasts, who says there's not 700,000 jobs out there. So, okay, that's fine. Let's say that there's only 70,000 jobs out there. Let's say only 10% of the figures are right. The bigger question is, how do we go get those jobs? And while Ben tap danced around the question when I asked it to him, his answer indicated that in order to be a cyber professional, you need to have 5 to 7 years of IT experience. I said, okay. If that's where we're going, then why are CISOs supporting these degree programs in cybersecurity? Why are in either the associate's level or the bachelor's level? Because what you're telling me is it's time to go back to IT. And are we prepared to understand that an entry-level security engineer is an engineer that has 7 years of IT experience, which means the starting salaries are going to be a little bit higher than we're paying these college kids coming out of school. Mm-hmm. So we're talking out of both sides of our mouth. Yeah. And it's not going to get better, unless we come together for answers. So I don't have a solution. I'm not a Fortune 500. Hell, I'm not even a CISO anymore. I don't have a solution. Or rather, I'm not in a position to force the solution. But there's a lot of power that exists in terms of the community. And if the leaders within our community, at least positionally, showed up together, we could move this mountain maybe even half an inch. But we're not. And shame on us for doing that. We've been going almost 3 hours, haven't we?
You can talk.
I'm sorry.
You can go. No, I think, it's unfortunate how there's a lot of people eager to get into cyber and they don't find their way. And then ultimately they find a way elsewhere.
Yeah.
And they find it through, and this is something that, Mike and I talked about even too, and even Andy, they go to the help desk, or they go to networking, or they go to network engineering, and they go to something that's less appealing, right, for what they actually want.
Yeah, it's worse than that.
Because the machine that they're feeding is one that insists that their experience come first, but the machine also has it reminds me of like a math problem where it's an if or statement. If you have this, then this, right?
Yeah.
And you get through the first nest and you get to the next. But if this doesn't exist, you therefore fail.
Yep.
So it what it looks like is looking outside in, because like I said, I'm not a security professional, right? I'm just kind of adjacent to the world through other tech things. And what it seems like to me is if I were to distill the community or not the community, but the route to get a break in cyber, it's a broken math equation.
Yeah. Where
the first ring of the logic insists that you have this or that, and if you pass that, and it reminds me of like a PLC, if this then that, and then you go down to the next rung, and it says, by the way, now that you're here, if you don't have this, then go back there.
Yep.
But it's not really clear up here from the first rung that you have additional steps to do. And so what ends up happening is you go this route that's been defined in some way or another.
And that's the problem. It hasn't been defined.
Well, I guess it's been assumed. Right? It's been assumed by requirements on the job applications. And
it is assumed, and I would submit we're lying to people. We're assuming that that's all that's required, but in point of fact, it's not. So I've hit all the and what you're saying in terms of I've hit all the requirements on the application, but I still can't get a job, and I still can't get hired within the environment. And I tell people we're lying to people. And even worse, I like where you were going in terms of taking other jobs to what you and Mike were talking about. But there's another piece of this. And that other piece is take the people who we're teaching some of these skills, pen testing, vulnerability, etc. Okay. I'm teaching people how to lockpick. And then I'm not giving them jobs as locksmiths. So what do they go do? Particularly if they're disgruntled.
Break in.
So are we creating an environment where not only are we not sustaining ourselves, but we're feeding the beast?
It's like an existential crisis.
See, that's the thing that concerns me. We spent the better part of 5 or 6 years talking to people. All you can do is hack, and everyone wants to be a pen tester, etc. Which is great. But how about all those high school kids we're teaching in terms of how to do that and getting them excited about this, and there's no jobs? They still have that skill.
Skills exist. And there's other places that pay for it.
Yeah, and there are other places where they can make money doing it, not on this side of the law.
Yeah.
So, we're teaching, we're creating thousands of people who know how to lockpick for theoretically thousands of lockpick jobs, but we're only hiring 12.
You just get a lot of
cat burglars.
Yeah. You got a lot of people that have a skill and they desire.
Yeah.
And probably resentment.
That's the piece. The resentment.
Yeah. What's the one person you don't ever want to piss off?
My wife.
Okay, who's the second person? The second kind of person is the one that has a grudge.
Yeah.
Or someone that has a personal vendetta, right?
Yeah.
And I think if you, as an outsider looking in, or as someone that goes through the security process or to be certified, and you personally take all this time, effort, money to meet what is required of you, and then find out that you're still not good enough.
Yeah.
It becomes, almost like a vendetta to say, well, I will prove to you that I am good enough. And let me show you how I'm going to do that. And then Mike and I talked about Star Wars, right? And
always a good topic, but keep going.
We talked about how his vision of creating cyber professionals is more so his way to kind of build an army. At least I called it that. That's what I said. And I said towards the end, I told me that it reminded me of A New Hope, right? And Rogue One, where everyone died.
Yeah.
But they were doing it for a cause, and the cause was to bring down the Death Star.
Yeah.
Right. What I find interesting there is there's a lot of parallels to people that want to be in cyber, that love cyber, right? They love it maybe to the extent that they put their life into it, and then they find out that it's dead. And we know who else in Star Wars had that same exact arc?
Darth Vader.
The woman that he loved, the kid that he had, when she died, that's when he turned, right? And to me, I obviously watch Star Wars, right? I watch it with my kids. My youngest one doesn't really watch it, but the older one loves it, right? There's a lot of these parallels where it's like when you lose a loved one, you become vengeful, right? And it's that pain is more so like the love enduring because you no longer have it.
Yep.
And when you say all these people go through this process and then they find out that they can't get a job, to me, what I would see is
1% of them hold a grudge. What are we doing?
You're in trouble. You're essentially creating a passionate enemy.
And I would contend that we've done that. I would contend that it's probably still a small fraction, but there are folks out there who started down the path of goodness and light and got annoyed. And because they got annoyed, they went to the dark side. I believe that. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think I am.
You're wrong.
Yeah.
I think so. That's another good thing about these conversations is I've never thought about what happens when you put your heart and everything into a profession to only be laid off.
Yeah.
Right. To put your life work towards an organization that finds you as a number at the end of the day. You find a competitor to go work for, right? You're not happy with how things are going over here because of how you're treated. Now you just go work for another company, not corporate espionage, but more so just in spite of how you were treated. So I think maybe that's another thing is to be, as professionals in cyber, more so you specifically and other people in the cyber world, is to be aware of kind of how these ideas of building communities can backfire.
Yeah, well, I don't think it's the idea of building community. It's building responsible community. It's also truly understanding that community can't be just a buzzword. One of the things I love regarding the cyber community here in Phoenix, having watched it grow and continue to mature, from its infancy, which is where it was when I moved out here over 20 years ago, is a good friend of mine, a retired CISO by the name of Mark Williams, once said, particularly here in Phoenix, there's not 6 degrees of separation in cyber. There are 3.
Okay.
There are 3. If I don't know you, then I know somebody who knows somebody who knows you, or knows somebody who knows you. Yeah, and it's someone else made the statement that in other communities, you screw up, it's easy, you rebuild, etc. Here, you may have to move because everybody knows you. And it's not that we're bad-mouthing you, etc. It's just we are a tight-knit, highly supportive community, or were. I think we are still highly supportive. We're not as tight-knit as we used to be. COVID, I think, helped exacerbated that. Mm-hmm. And I think cyber in general, not only to help whip up the bad guys and not only to stay ahead of the bad guys, but we need to retake our sense of community. We genuinely need to remember that it's a team sport. We need to come together on more than just on the screens, and we need to spend time for one another. And I don't know how to do that amongst you young whippersnappers anymore. I just don't. I don't know what the community would accept. I'm right now debating the idea of trying to resurrect the old cyber happy hours out there, but the valley has gotten so much bigger. I'm trying to figure out, the problem we used to have is we used to migrate it to different places, but that would mean we were creating sub-communities rather than how do we bring X number of us together? When do we have it? Where do we have it? Hell, probably closer to downtown, but that's still a 40-minute commute for you. Yeah. And when do we have it? And so that, you can get off work enough time to make that commute and not be stuck in rush hour for 3 hours afterwards. So it's a hard problem. But
and not on the weekend.
And never on the weekend.
Nobody wants to do anything on the weekend.
The job's hard enough and we have families. Yeah.
Unless you're like Sean, right?
Yeah.
And you messed up your configuration.
Yeah. He's busy this weekend.
Sean. Saturday.
And Sunday. He's busy this weekend.
Learn your lesson. Yeah, maybe that's the next step. And, I think where I see this going for me personally is just being able to talk to people and, have relationships with people. And maybe at some point there's a happy hour, right? Or there's something that we put together, and then I just invite people that have been on, and then everyone gets to meet and kind of come together. But it is hard to schedule stuff, right? It's definitely hard when everyone's busy.
And my pushback on that, agreeing with that factually, but my pushback with that gets to big rocks theory. You've heard about big rocks theory, I'm assuming?
Big rocks?
Yeah. Okay.
No, I mean...
Business parable. It's the way I heard it. A consulting firm had all their young consultants go through a time management course taught by a former CEO. And the first day of the course, he came in and he said, okay, here's a test. He took out this big 10-gallon mason jar, and then he took out these fist-sized rocks. He started putting fist-sized rocks into the mason jar up until no more would fit.
And then he put smaller rocks.
And he asked if the jar is full, and someone says yes. Then he put smaller rocks. Then he put sand and then water. Yeah. And for those not familiar with it, he then asks, what's the lesson? And one young consultant said, the lesson is even when you think your calendar is full, there's always time for something more. And he said that is absolutely incorrect, though don't feel bad, because everybody in every class makes that assumption, and at least you were brave enough to state that, because I guarantee you half the class was thinking the same thing. The lesson is simpler. The only way to make it fit is to put the big rocks in first. So in your schedule and in your life, you have to decide what the big rocks are. Put them in your calendar and schedule and hold them sacrosanct. So if working out, if, as was in my case in my first gig, I'm not missing my kids' soccer games or band concerts or whatever that is, that goes into your calendar and it does not move. That is the only way to make things fit. Coming back to what you were saying earlier, yeah, it's hard. But if community events and or networking is a big rock, not that it's an everyday big rock, but is a big rock,
put it down.
You make the time. Yeah, you make the time. So my support to anyone watching this, to anyone listening to this, is make community a big rock. If we do that, there's a lot of power here. I mean, hell, this community collectively in Phoenix, in addition to the Fortune 500 CISOs that we have here, like Fred Gibbons as an example at Amex, has produced Marnie Wilking, who is overseas as the CISO of Booking.com, and has just produced Jason Lish, who is now the CISO at Cisco Systems. And that's just top of my head.
Within the last 2 weeks, right?
Last month or so, yeah.
Okay.
So this community has a lot of horsepower it's created. Mm-hmm. It has a lot of people who have come from this community. And there's a lot of affection and love within here as we scattered out to the four winds as the 6th largest city in America, if I remember correctly.
Correct.
If we harness that, there's a lot that we can do. So, my ask to anybody who's watching this, my ask to the Phoenix community is make your community a big rock. If we do that, we can do a lot of good stuff.
And to tie that back to the very beginning with velocity.
Yes.
Velocity is the change in acceleration.
Speed in a given direction.
Well, the velocity could be defined as, right? So the change in your the change in your speed is the acceleration, right?
Okay.
Or the change in your velocity is the acceleration, right?
I see where you're going.
So if you want to make an impact, the equation for that is force equals mass times acceleration.
Okay.
Right? In order to have a large force, you either need something really big or something really fast.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get big? People. Because people are the mass in the equation.
Okay.
Right? And then the acceleration would be people moving in the same direction quickly.
I'm stealing that. I like that.
So what you end up getting is to make an impact in the community of cybersecurity, being the 4th largest community in the U.S., to make that impact, you need people. But you also need people moving in the same direction that help propel the acceleration factor of that equation to a higher number.
I like that. I'm stealing that. I will give you credit, but I am stealing that.
And I think with that, maybe that's the biggest lesson, is to make a change in an organization, you have to have velocity, right? But in order to make a change in a community, you have to have people coming together with a intent of velocity and essentially increasing that through acceleration to get the output of the force.
I like that.
Steal it, use it.
Done.
That's my closing.
Thus endeth the lesson. I do like that.